You're muted, Jacob.
Can't hear you.
You are muted, Jacob.
A collection of Shakespeare scenes that are feature two characters, and that will be performing in early May. So we encourage you to join us for that, as well as for the focus workshop in April. And we also have two full uncut Shakespeare productions this summer. As You Like It, which starts as soon as school gets out and performs in late July and early August, and a production of Othello, which begins in late June and performs in late August. So if you're between the ages of 7 or 18 or thereabouts, we encourage you to join us for one or both of those summer plays. One note about the performance this evening is that we have two very brief, exactly 5 minutes long intermissions. And so please come right back for those. And I should also say that YSP has existed for 41 years now, thanks to people in the community who believe in the work that these young people are doing and support it with their financial contributions. So if you are able to do so, we encourage you to make a donation on our website at ysp.org or send us a check. And it will be tax deductible to you as well. And if you're not already on our email list, you can sign up at the website, ysp.org, or send us an email at ysp@ysp.org. And we will make sure you hear all about what's coming up at YSP. Since it is a busy time with us, we haven't let the pandemic stop us from doing our work, and we hope to do more and more in person too, if all goes well this summer. So we encourage you to join us again and again. And with that, I'll let the young Shakespeare players take you to the magical forest of James Thurber's The White Deer.
YSP's Dickens Dramatic Reading Society presents
The White Deer by James Thurber.
Part 1, The Magical Forest.
If You Should Walk
And Wind
and Wander Far Enough.
On one of those afternoons in April when smoke goes down instead of up,
and nearby things sound far away,
and far things near,
you are more than likely to come at last to the enchanted forest
That lies between the Moonstone Mines and Centaur's Mountain.
You'll know the woods when you are still a long way off.
by virtue of a fragrance you can never quite forget.
And never quite remember.
And there'll be distant bells that cause boys to run and girls to laugh.
And girls to stand and tremble.
If you pluck one of the 10,000 toadstools that grow in the emerald grass at the edge of the wonderful woods,
It will feel as heavy as a hammer in your hand.
But if you let it go, it will sail away over the trees like a tiny parachute.
trailing black and purple stars.
There's even a tale,
First told by minstrels in the medieval time,
That rabbits here can tip their heads as men now tip their hats.
removing them with their paws and putting them back again.
this enchanted forest was once upon a time part of the kingdom
Of a mighty monarch named Claude, who had 3 sons,
Zag,
Gallo
and Jorn.
Zag,
and Gallo
Like their father, King Claude,
were great hunters.
and when they were not eating or sleeping, they were engaged in the chase.
Jorn, the youngest and shortest of the princes,
He was only 6 feet tall.
Was a poet and musician.
and when he was not at table or in bed, he was fond of setting his verses to the music of the lyre.
He occasionally took part in the hunt,
When his father and brothers insisted,
But He was careful to loose his arrows and cast his lances clear of whatever quarry the royal family might be pursuing.
3 times in the middle of the century in which they lived, the king and his 2 older sons depleted their kingdom of wildlife.
And 3 times they had been forced to wait around the castle,
restlessly stringing their bows
feathering their arrows,
and sharpening their lances.
until a new generation of deer and wild boar could come to maturity in the fields and forests.
King Claude
And Thag
and Gallo,
ate oftener, drank more, and slept longer during these tedious periods of inactivity.
and they fell to buffeting and plaguing the members of their retinue.
and particularly a dwarf named Quando, and the royal wizard.
A castle wizard, whose magic consisted chiefly of sleight of hand and juggling.
Since he was not privy to the secrets of the woods wizards who lived in the enchanted forest.
Bjorn found these seasons serene,
And spent his time singing of a faraway princess who would one day set a perilous labor for each of the princes to perform.
he sang that love, not might, would untie the magic knot,
Or open the mystic lock.
or hoodwink the dreadful dragon.
Or resolve whatever other problem the faraway princess might propose as the key to her heart and hand.
Thag and Gallo guffawed at their younger brother's finickery, as they called it,
And they would take to tossing Quando, the dwarf, back and forth in the air as if he were a ball.
oblivious of his guttural protests.
The older brothers knew better than to put upon Bjorn.
For he had more than once taken falls from them in wrestling.
And he could hold his own at tilting on horseback.
One night, when the 3rd period of waiting for the boar and the deer to return and to venture abroad still had 100 moons to run,
King Claude told a tale to his sons over his tankards.
While Bjorn strummed softly on his lyre,
and Quando sat in a dark corner of the banquet hall,
under a great shield.
Nursing his scars and bruises.
"There's always the enchanted forest to hunt."
Prince Thag had growled at supper time, testing the string of a longbow.
There is always the enchanted forest to shun.
King Claude had roared.
And he went on to tell of how he had once dared to chase a fleet deer in the magic woods with his own father and 2 brothers.
And how they had brought the deer to bay against the sheer wall of Centaur's Mountain.
And how,
As they made ready to launch their arrows,
the deer had been transformed into a tall, dark, young princess.
who had been changed into a deer years before by a wicked old woman jealous of the young girl's beauty.
there we were.
Went on Claude.
Your grandfather, King Bode, and his 3 sons, your Uncle Garth, your Uncle Clune, and myself, feeling like sheep in our chagrin and dismay, or like a mastiff that goes growling boldly into a wolf's den and comes upon a pink-eyed female rabbit. One of those grinning woods wizards came along presently and conjured up a white palfrey for the princess out of thin air, as I remember it. And we rode off to the castle. We gave the princess food and wine and a pillow for her head. And on the following day, we set off in full panoply and jingling trappings to carry her to her father. a king whose lands lay far to the north. We jingled through apple blossoms as we started out, for it was May, and we jingled through snowflakes when we neared her ancestral castle. Her father and mother were overjoyed to see their daughter again, and her father set a series of passable tables in honor of the occasion. Although, to my taste, the wines of the North smack a bit of buckle polish, or lance oil, it may be. This was many years ago,
Why have you never told?
said Thag.
This tale before,
Said Gallo.
You were too young
said Claude.
for such a tale as might offend the growing heart. Where was I?
This was many years ago.
Thag prompted,
Yes.
said Claude.
Well, your grandfather and your uncles and I were eager to set off for home in the chase. The princess's father was a fellow of small fancies, with an indoor turn of mind, given to dawdling over the chessboard, even when in the keenest hunting weather, drinking a warmish wassail full of aloes or something. We were not to get off as soon or as easy as we thought. It was the infernal custom of the country whereby a rescued princess exercises the privilege of claiming one of her rescuers as her husband. She was a pretty enough gray-eyed minx, but she was fond of the harp and of the spinet, with no stomach for the chase, and a way of fluttering up behind a man before he knew it, moving like a cat on velvet. The upshot was that your grandfather rode home alone, and the princess set Clune and Garf and myself each a perilous labor. Clune was to bring back the golden right wing of a great falcon of Fairlane. Garf, an uncouth varlet at best, though an angel in the saddle, was sent to bring back a drop of blood from the right index finger of 100 kings, an adventure which could only conceivably be concluded within the lifespan, which could not conceivably be concluded within the lifespan of the human being. And I was told off to fetch the princess an enormous diamond said to lie between the paws of a fearful creature, half dragon and half rock, in the cave of a mountain not many leagues distant.
King Claude filled up 2 tankards from a bowl of wine and the table at the table before him.
And drank them off.
You were too young to remember,
He continued,
but a traveler from faraway Fairlane passed this way some 20 years ago with the news that your Uncle Clune was bested in his struggle with the great falcon, whose left wing, it transpired during the battle, was made of edged and pointed steel. Your Uncle Garf has never been heard from to this day, which is reasonable enough in view of estimates arrived at by my royal recorder, who has figured out that it requires 97 years to procure a drop of blood from the right index finger of 100 kings.
While the king filled his tankards again with wine,
Prince Jorn strummed a sorrowful song on his lyre.
To make a rather distressing story short,
resumed King Claude,
the monster I was dispatched to overcome proved to be made of clay and boxwood, so that it was the simplest of tasks to deprive the creature of the enormous diamond clutched between its artificial paws. I delivered the stone to the princess and won her hand in marriage, having already won the fair lady's heart, as even Quando there can see.
The king sat back in his great chair and closed his eyes,
And the moral of this tale
grumbled Quando.
is precisely what?
The king opened one eye,
The moral of this tale
he said.
is precisely never hunt deer in the enchanted forest.
Thag and Gallo,
Who had sat staring at their father through his recital,
Looked at each other and at the king again.
we do not like it.
said
Said
Thag.
Thag.
Our mother having once been a deer?
Said Gallo.
Jorn spoke for the first time.
It was but the illusory and meaningless shape of magic.
He said, and returned to his music.
The boy has it.
Roared King Claude.
It was, as he says, meaningless magic.
He tapped a tankard on the table top.
Never quite got used to it, though.
He admitted at last.
I don't suppose a hunting man ever could.
There was a long and thoughtful silence before Claude spoke again.
She took to her chamber of a mortal malady shortly after Jorn was born, and never set foot on the stair again,
Perhaps she died of a fall.
said Thag.
Perhaps she died of a surfeit.
Said Gallo.
Perhaps she died of a look.
Said Jorn.
The king hurled a tankard at the youngest prince, and Jorn caught it in midair.
As his mother's quickness and his mother's grace.
Uttered Claude.
He sighed.
Well, there is the tale.
The royal high chamberlain's voice spoke suddenly behind Claude's chair.
And the king started slightly.
Must I have men who creep about like cats?
Roared Claude.
There is a minstrel, sire.
The royal high chamberlain said.
Send him in. Then send him in.
Cried Claude.
He'll sing to us of strong men and the chase. I've had enough of sorrow and of love.
He glared at Jorn.
The minstrel entered softly
And sat upon a stool.
and strummed his lute and sang. He sang of a white deer.
A white deer with the speed of light.
A white deer as lovely to look upon as a waterfall in springtime.
When the song was done, the king asked,
Is this deer as swift as light and as lovely as a waterfall in springtime, a creature of your silly fancy? Or does it have breath and blood that I and my sons may test its speed and strength?
The minstrel sang.
The white deer flesh is like the light through the forest day and night.
Name me the name of this forest.
Roared the king.
The minstrel sang.
By night and day, the white deer shines betwixt the mountain and the mines.
At this, King Claude rose from his chair.
Upsetting a tankard of red wine that spilled onto the floor.
You bound the enchanted forest with your infernal rhyme.
He cried.
No man of King Claude's household hunts in those accursed woods.
The minstrel sang,
Too swift for Dag, too quick for Gallo, too strong for young Prince Jorn to follow. But foot of turtle, heart of toad, never shall be spoke of Claude.
The king pulled at his long black mustaches.
And a light flickered in his eye and went out.
and flickered again like the light of a firefly.
Mayhap
He said at last.
this white deer with the speed of light is a true deer. We shall test its vaunted prowess on the morrow. If it be a true deer, I shall hang its head upon the wall and its meat in the larder. If it be a lovely maiden enchanted by some witch's or wizard's spell, the daughter of some king whose lands lie to the north or east or south or west, I shall drive my lance and arrow through this foolish minstrel's heart.
King Claude pounded a tankard on the table to accent each word of his ominous warning.
But when he looked around, the minstrel had disappeared.
King Claude frowned.
Fellow bore a remarkable resemblance to somebody or other I have encountered somewhere or other.
He muttered.
If this be a true deer,
Said Thag.
we shall enjoy the greatest chase in history.
If this be a true deer,
Said Gallo.
we shall hang the finest venison in all the world.
The king's eyes gleamed as he swallowed a great apricot.
And if this be a true princess of the blood,
It was the rumbling voice of Quando the dwarf speaking from his corner.
The king hurled an apple at the dwarf.
but Jorn caught it in the air.
If this be a true princess of the royal blood,
Jorn said,
she shall set the sons of Claude each a perilous labor to find the prince most worthy of her heart and hand.
At this, to show their strength,
Thag caught up a heavy iron bar in the fireplace and bent it double.
and
And
Gallo
Gallo turned.
a double handspring down the floor.
Jorn watched his brothers and stroked the strings of his lyre.
The king tugged at his mustaches, his eyes burning with dreams of the chase.
Quando sat in his corner under the shield.
Watching Claude and Thag and Gallo.
And listening to the music of Jorn's lyre.
The next morning, as the sun was rising, the king and his 3 sons, riding on black chargers, entered the enchanted forest
Reined in.
and gazed about.
Pick not that buttercup,
Said Claude.
Pointing a leathery finger at a small flower in the emerald grass.
or it will turn to flame and burn your hand.
Do not pick the lichen from that tree,
Said Thag.
or it will turn to blood and stain your hand.
Do not touch that white stone there,
Said Gallo.
or it will come alive and bite your hand.
There was thunder suddenly from behind the moonstone lines.
The sun went out,
A flash of lightning made the 4 horses tremble.
And in the darkness all around the king and his sons shimmered a million fireflies.
while Claude and his sons gazed at the shimmering dance in amazement. The fireflies changed to snowflakes, which fell softly to the earth and disappeared.
The thunder ceased,
The clouds parted.
and the sun came out again.
These constant tricks upon the eye are bad for a man's digestion.
said King Claude.
I shall have no stomach for the finest meat on earth if this false flux of fact and form does not desist,
What's hot is cold,
said
Fag.
Fag.
What's hard is soft,
said Gallo,
What's night is day.
said Claude.
Jorn, who had been thinking up a verse during the show of marvels, recited it.
what's black is white, what's red is blue, what's dark is light, what's true is true.
Well rhymed, Prince Jorn.
Said a voice that seemed to come from nowhere.
Until the king and his sons looked down and saw,
A woods wizard
in a blue robe,
and a red peaked cap.
Ho!
said the king, glaring at the wizard.
Have I not seen you otherwhere than here?
You have seen me other when than now.
Said the sorcerer.
Plucking a pansy and tossing it into the air.
Where it became a butterfly and fluttered away through the trees.
I have ridden in these woods but once before,
said King Claude.
26 years, 25 days, and 24 hours ago,
said the wizard.
My father and my brothers and I pursued a deer,
said Claude.
which against the wall of Centaur's mountain underwent a marvelous and mortifying metamorphosis. I am a little touchy on the topic too, so do not turn your tongue to taunts,
He does not turn his tongue.
said Jorn.
He twists your own to M's and T's.
and W's,
Said the wizard.
as you shall see.
Try twice that trick on Claude,
said the king with great dignity.
my mousy man of magic, and we will rid these wids of wizards.
King Claude made a royal gesture of arrogance, authority, and austerity.
While his sons stared at him in astonishment,
You speak magic words, O Claude.
said the wizard smugly.
Removing his cap and bowing deeply.
And now may I be of service to you and the princes, Thag and Gallo and Jorn. May I show you the barking tree, or the musical mud, or the wingless birds?
The king grimaced at this list of wonders.
And Prince Jorn answered the wizard.
My father seeks the white deer,
He said,
the white deer, swift as light and lovely as a waterfall in the springtime.
The wizard bowed again and flung his cap in the air.
What goes up must not come down.
He said.
And the cap, swinging slowly like a bell, sailed silently over the trees.
Rising higher and higher until finally it could be seen no more.
What comes down must go up.
said the wizard.
And he wiggled 3 fingers of his left hand toward the ground.
Suddenly, the snowflakes that had melted and vanished began to rise from the earth.
And when they were as high as the wizard's heart, they changed into 1,000,000 fireflies.
The king and his sons watched in wonder.
And for a moment, 4 horses and 4 men were as still as statues in amazement.
For through the glow and glimmer and gleam, there suddenly flashed a white deer
as swift as light.
and as lovely as a waterfall in springtime.
Hoy-yo!
Cried the king, and he and his sons were off in pursuit.
The sparks from their horses' hoofs joined in the dance of the fireflies.
The white deer flashed through the green forest, and the king and his sons followed.
Past the barking tree,
Across the musical mud,
in and out of a flock of wingless birds.
On and on went the chase until the sun began to set, and
The white-
long, strange shadows fell.
the white deer led its pursuers through a silver swamp.
And a bronze bog.
And a golden glade,
Its speed still swift as light.
it shot like an arrow through a fiery fen.
And over a misty moor.
It climbed a ruby ridge.
Flung across a valley of violets.
And sped along the pearly path leading to the myriad mazes of the moonstone mines.
20 hooves thundered hotly through a haunted hollow
Of spectral sycamores.
Hung with lighted lanterns,
and past a turquoise tarn.
and along an avenue of asphodel,
And turned and twisted.
Down a dark descent
which led at last
to a pale and perilous plain.
The setting sun sank into the sea.
7 stars shone suddenly in the sky.
And the white deer's dreadful day was done.
Its race was run,
For now it stood silent
and still
and shivering.
Under the mighty crag called Centaur's Mountain.
King Claude and the princes Thag and Gallo prepared to loose their arrows.
and Jorn closed his eyes against the sight.
When he opened them a moment later, the royal huntsmen had dropped their bows and arrows to the earth to stare.
Not at a deer at bay, but at a tall and dark and youthful maiden, a veritable princess.
Clad in a long white satin robe,
A sparkle of jewels in her hair,
golden sandals upon her feet, her red lips parted prettily, her dark eyes shining.
4 horses raised 8 ears in sharp surprise.
3 princes fell upon their knees at the maiden's feet.
and the king glowered and tugged at his mustaches.
As royal a run as a king could know.
He growled.
And it ends as always in vanished venison and a lovely lady to carry to her kingdom. Pray God her father has a decent taste in wines.
But when young Jorn,
Who alone of the princes could find his tongue,
Asked the maid to name her name and tell her kingdom,
she could only shake her head and say she did not know.
King Claude sighed,
swing her to your saddle, Jorn,
said,
and we will serve her at our table in another way than I had hoped. Make haste before that wicked woods wizard shows up to make sport of us all.
Prince Jorn lifted the princess to his saddle.
and the jingle of the harness bells and buckles sounded like merry laughter in King Claude's ears as he whirled his horse about.
And they began the long ride home.
Across the pale and perilous plain,
Up the dark descent,
along the avenue of asphodel,
Past the turquoise tarn
through the haunted hollow,
of spectral sycamores,
hung with lighted lanterns,
in and out of the myriad mazes of the moonstone mines,
along the pearly path,
across the valley of violets,
over the ruby ridge,
and the misty moor,
through the fiery fen,
and the golden glade,
and the bronze bog,
and the silver swamp,
in and out of the flock of wingless birds,
across the musical mud,
past the barking tree,
and through the green forest and the shimmering fireflies
and out at last upon the open road.
that led straight.
to the castle.
Part 2, The Lost Princess.
The next morning, the princess sat in an eastern room,
And watched the sunlight.
Falling through slits and circles in the ancient castle wall.
make small bright patterns on the cold stone floor.
The royal wizard
A wizard, as we have said, of meager devices,
juggled 7 silver spears for the entertainment of the princess,
while Quando sat in the corner and watched first the silver spheres and then the dark, bewildered eyes of the lovely maiden.
she had lain awake most of the night,
trying in vain to remember her name and the name of her father.
On the floor at her feet, the royal recorder sat cross-legged,
Chanting the names of kings from a ponderous ledger.
in the hope that one of them might light a light in the lady's eyes.
He had reached the P's and droned steadily on.
Pack, Pardo, Parel, Pent, Peril, Pio, Piligro, Piv, Podo, Polinel, Puggy.
At the name of Puggy, the princess started slightly.
But only because the royal wizard had dropped one of the silver spheres.
Quando picked it up and tossed it back to him.
The royal recorder made a series of sounds with his tongue and teeth.
King Puggy
He said disapprovingly.
is the most disreputable king in the whole registry of kings. He lives in a ruined castle on a hill with his 7 madcap daughters. The old king's wife died of a fit of shrieks when all the princesses were very young. Now, Puggy and his 7 maids live all alone, wreaking every kind of hob and havoc on their hill, rolling boulders down on passers-by, turning rivers from their normal courses, stealing gems and silks from travelers so they can dress in gaudy masquerade and play their wild and eerie games by jack-o'-lantern light.
The royal recorder raised his hands and shook his head.
Every night is Halloween on Puggy's Hill.
The princess frowned and turned a little pale.
The royal recorder sighed again and read more names.
Glancing at the princess after every name,
But she gave no sign of recognition.
He ran through 20 Q's
and 30 R's,
And 40 S's,
and 10 T's,
and 5 U's,
and 2 V's and 13 W's.
and 90 X's, and 56 Y's.
and came at last to the Z's,
Czar,
he said.
and the princess jumped in her chair.
but only because the royal wizard had dropped another silver sphere.
Quando tossed it back to him, and the juggling and the droning continued.
Zazo, Zat, Zawaza, Zav, Zax, Zay, Zazir, Zazuno, Ziz.
Chanted the recorder.
And he closed the record of royalty with a dusty thump, shook his head sadly, and stood up.
The wizard let the silver spheres drop into a wide pocket of his long robe.
Quando gazed softly at the princess.
I have a memory of trees and fields, and a memory of nothing more.
She sighed.
This presents a problem for a practitioner of physic,
Said the royal recorder.
but unhappily the royal physician is quite ill of some mysterious malady and has given orders that he must not be disturbed.
The princess studied with troubled eyes a pattern of crenulated shadow on the floor.
There is, to be sure, the royal clockmaker. He has made several shrewd surmises in his time. Taco, the clockmaker,
He added.
was formerly the royal astronomer.
The princess took a kerchief and wiped a ledger smudge from the royal recorder's cheek.
Why is Taco no longer the royal astronomer?
She asked.
He got so old he could not see the planets very well, or even the moon, or even the sun.
Said the recorder.
His constant reports that everything was going out alarmed King Claude, who must have light to hunt by, as you know, and no offense intended.
The princess smiled faintly.
The recorder went on.
Let me have men in my towers who bring me news of bright light sun and stars, King Claude then cried. So Taco was set to making clocks and chimes and sundials, and a younger man named Paz now scans the skies. He has invented rose-colored lenses for his telescopes, so even the palest moon and coldest star turns red and deep, and it is thus reported to the king. Let us visit the shadowy shops of ancient Taco and hear what we may hear.
They found Taco in his shop, carving a legend on a sundial.
After this brief light, the unending dark.
The old man's eyes were so dim.
And the 100 clocks ticked and chimed so loudly
That he was not aware of his visitors.
the princess read the legend carved on another sundial.
It is darker than you think.
And on a third.
This little light and then the night.
The royal recorder tapped the ancient clockmaker on his shoulder.
And Taco looked up with pale and misty eyes.
I bring a nameless princess
Said the royal recorder.
who has a memory of trees and fields and a memory of nothing more.
He cupped his hand close to the old man's ear.
And told the tale of the white deer.
And of how it had been transformed into a tall and dark and lovely princess at the foot of Centaur's mountain.
And of how he had read out all the names of kings in the royal register without lighting a light in the eyes of the princess.
You were ever a man of shrewd surmises and gifted guesses.
Concluded the royal recorder.
What say you ails this lady?
The clockmaker waved his long, thin fingers of one hand.
Send the lady to walk in the garden
He said,
where the silver fountains play, the while I hazard a few hazards of what has happened to her head.
the hands of the 100 clocks pointed to noon
But the clocks chimed 8,
and 6
And 9,
and 4.
and all the other hours but 12.
maidens have a strange effect on clocks,
Said Taco.
causing them to strike too long or too little, making a travesty of time.
The royal recorder led the princess to the door and showed her the gardens where the silver fountains played.
And he watched her through as she until she moved among the trees.
Lovely but forlorn, beyond the sound of clocks and voices.
Perhaps she had a fall and struck us down,
Said the recorder.
and in this wise lost her memory.
The old man shook his head.
Perhaps she drank a potion or a filter,
Said the recorder.
and in this wise lost her memory.
The old man shook his head again and said,
You ask me to assume assumptions, and you assume assumptions of your own.
The recorder said that he was sorry.
and listened in silence while the old man spoke.
I mind a tale my father told 100 years ago, or thereabouts.
Said Taco.
A marvelous tale of a true deer who befriended a woods wizard. It seems this woods wizard in the olden time had a fall or drank a potion or a filter and tumbled senseless in a stream in April, when streams are swift and strong. The tale tells how a passing deer plucked the senseless wizard from the stream and saved its life. In return for this good and timely deed, he gave the deer the power of changing to a princess, tall and dark and lovely. In the event that hunters pressed it hard and there was nowhere to flee, as when a deer is brought to bay at Centaur's Mountain.
The recorder's eyes grew large and round, and his mouth fell open.
In the pause that followed the 100 clocks,
Whose hands pointed to 11 minutes after noon,
Struck 13 times.
when the chiming ceased, the recorder spoke.
Do you mean to tell me, Taco, that the princess is in all save shape and semblance a true deer and not a princess of the royal blood?
In due course,
pursued the old man,
the deer I speak of in the ancient time was hotly pressed by some hobbledehoy of the region, unaccountably skillful in the saddle, and brought to bay against a crag too steep to climb. As the hunter raised his bow, the panting wild-eyed deer became before his goggling eyes a princess, in all seeming tall and dark and lovely. The hobbledehoy turned white and red and blue and rode off as fast as his spent horse could travel, leaving his bow and arrow on the ground. The deer, in maiden's guise, made its way to the cave of the woods wizard it had befriended and put to him a quavering question. How could it remain a maiden and live in the manner of a maiden? The wizard, out of his old gratitude, gave the deer the power of remaining a maiden in shape and semblance until such time as love should fail her thrice. If love should fail her thrice, then she must resume her true form forever and forever, come what may. The first to love her was a poet. The second was a minstrel. The third was a knight. Each in his turn discovered her true nature, and each in his turn failed of his love. For who can love a lady who is in reality a deer?
There was a long moment, only the ticking of the clocks.
And the faint sound of the fountains,
And in the end,
asked the royal recorder.
when love had failed her thrice,
In the end, when love had failed her thrice,
Taco said.
she was instantly changed back into her true and proper form. A fortnight later, she was hard pressed by the same Oi who had pursued her before. This time, his arrow found her heart.
The clocks all of a sudden struck 7,
is this a truth you tell me?
demanded the recorder.
The white deer of my father's time knew not her name, for white deer have no names. She had a memory of trees and fields, and a memory of nothing more.
Old Taco said.
How can I tell this tale to Claude, the proudest hunter of his day?
The royal recorder cried.
I beg you, Taco, doubt your doubts and hope some hope this princess may be real.
The old man coughed.
Against the may, the could be, and the should. Folly 'tis to balance doubt or hope. I know the symbols, signs, and symptoms of 1,000 spells. Sorceries run in cycles.
Neither the old man nor the younger observed a dark form in a gloomy corner of the shop.
It was the squatty figure of Quando who had crept in unnoticed.
His eyes were closed that they might not sparkle and be seen.
But he was not asleep.
The royal recorder turned without a word.
Opened the heavy oaken door.
And went out.
He watched the lovely princess walk toward him.
The sparkle of jewels in her hair, golden sandals on her feet.
And he marveled that a deer,
If this was indeed a deer,
could take so perfectly the shining semblance of a lady of royal blood.
the royal recorder wondered if he could truly love a lady who might at this time or that,
depending on the special spell that held her in enchantment.
begin to nibble at the young leaves on the trees.
He decided with a sigh and a shake of his head that he could not.
And made a little note to this effect in the archives of his heart.
There were question marks in the dark eyes of the nameless maid.
But the royal recorder shook his head.
And looked away.
And sighed.
The old man moaned and maundered, muttered, mumbled, odds of this and ends of that, bits and pieces, shards and edges, full of ifs and whens, and theirs and thens, amounting to, in the end and all, to 6 times less than nothing.
He bowed and sighed.
And bowed again.
And watched the princess cross the grass like summer rain.
And vanish through a portal.
It was a silent meal that noon in the long banquet hall,
which was so dark even in the daytime that torches flared from iron sconces on the heavy stone walls.
The mysterious maiden ate several walnuts,
refused wine,
and nibbled at a leaf of lettuce.
In such a way as to remind the uncomfortable king and his older sons of the previous day in the enchanted forest.
And their swift and surprising quarry.
Claude
and Thag
and Gallo
stirred restlessly in their chairs and grunted now and then.
Prince Jorn,
whose fond eyes betrayed his feeling for the nameless princess,
was pleased to see that she regarded him softly whenever she raised her own eyes to look down the table.
Quando the dwarf,
once more in his corner under the iron shield,
missed no glance or grunt.
His dark eyes never left the figures at the table.
If you do not eat better than this,
said the king to the princess,
I shall have to consult the royal gamekeeper.
Hastily corrected himself.
The royal physician.
The princess turned a pretty pink.
Jorn scowled at his father.
And the king, to cover his confusion, bawled for the royal wizard,
who appeared suddenly in a cloud of smoke.
I thought I told you not to appear in a cloud of smoke anymore,
growled the king.
The smell of powder spoils the fragrance of the wine. I told you that.
I forgot,
said the wizard.
Just come in the room like anybody else.
King.
Yes, sire,
said the wizard.
And he began to juggle 7 little crescent moons made of gold and silver.
The king continued to grumble to himself.
Bad enough when he used to appear in a flash of lightning and a clap of thunder. Worse now that he smells up the whole castle. Fellow's foolish tricks do not justify such an elaborate entrance. The average woods wizard knows more in one day than this buffoon learns in 10 years, despite the fact he attended one of the most expensive schools for sorcerers in the world. Bah! Can't teach a man to ride a horse or cast a spell. Comes naturally or it doesn't come at all.
Muttering and pulling at his mustaches, King Claude drank off a goblet of white wine, got up from the table, and went up the winding stone stair.
He was still talking to himself, and his voice echoed hollowly through castle halls and chambers.
I'll purge this lovely lady of her namelessness or eat an uncooked horse.
He listened at the door of the chamber where the royal physician lay in bed.
alternately groaning and comforting himself.
I'll never walk again. Come, come. We'll have us out of bed in no time. We'll bring the roses to those cheeks of ours in no time. No, we won't. Yes, we will. No, we won't. Yes, we will.
A long silence followed, and the king entered the chamber.
The royal physician was taking his temperature,
But he shook the mercury down without looking at it.
As a physician, I must take my temperature every 3 hours.
He said,
But as a patient, I must not be told what it is.
nobody ever tells me what anything is.
said the king, who did not know what the royal physician was talking about.
I came to speak to you as a physician, not as a patient.
I do not believe I can cure myself.
Said the sick man.
Now,
He retorted to himself.
we mustn't lose faith in the skill of our physician, must we?
The king sighed and went to a window and looked out on the castle grounds.
He tugged at the lobe of his right ear with his left hand and told the tale of the white deer which he and his sons had pursued.
And how it had become a tall, dark, and lovely princess who had no memory of trees
And fields.
and a memory of nothing more.
When he had finished the tale, he asked the physician what he thought was wrong with the princess, that she could not remember her name or the name of her father.
Perhaps she had a fall.
Said the sick man in his suave physician's voice.
Or perhaps she drank a potion or a philter.
She had no bruise on her head,
Said the king.
and the pupils of her eyes were not dilated.
The royal physician.
I must study the case when I get up, if I ever do, which I doubt. Roses in my cheeks, indeed. I don't believe I have the slightest notion what is the matter with me. Come, we mustn't get ourselves all worked up, must we?
I don't know.
Said the bewildered king,
He looked at the sick man.
sighed, and left the chamber.
And went to his couch where he lay thrashing and muttering to himself for an hour.
He got up at last and went heavily down the winding stone stair.
In the eastern chamber, from which the sunlight had departed, the king found the royal wizard,
Juggling the seven little moons and the seven silver spheres by the light of 17 tall candles.
The royal recorder was reciting names of imaginary kings to the princess.
who sat in the same chair she had sat in during the morning when he had recited the names of real kings.
Rango, Ringo, Ringo, Rongo, Rungo,
Chanted the recorder.
Rappo, Repo, Rippo, Rappo, Rupo.
The royal wizard dropped a moon and a spear.
And contemplated that the flickering candlelight made it difficult to see,
Quando squatted in his corner.
his dark eyes on the puzzled face of the princess.
Santo, Cento, Cinto, Santo, Sunto.
Droned the recorder.
Teletar, Teletar. Tilitar, Tolitar, Tulitar, Undan, Undin, Undun, Din, Undan, Undun.
What mummery goes forth here in the flickering light?
roared Claude.
I am making up the names of kings in the hope that one of them may light a light in the eyes of the princess.
Said the recorder.
Varalari, Verilari, Virilari, Voralari, Voralari, Waxy, Waxy, Wixy, Waxy, Waxy.
He intoned.
Pap, pep, pip, pop, pup.
Cried the king in disgust.
Enough of this wixy, waxy, wooksy. The lovely lady may be nameless, but any fool can see she is not the imaginary daughter of an imaginary monarch. I'll solve this pretty problem in the manner of a king, without a lot of this taradiddle and tiradaddle. I ordain and decree here and now that the princess shall set a perilous labor for each of my 3 sons. The first who succeeds in his task shall marry the wench. Nothing like marriage to bring a woman to her senses.
The eyes of the lost princess grew bright as she thought of Jorn.
And grave as she thought of Gallo.
And then frightened as she thought of Thag.
When the sun has reached the zenith on the morrow,
Said Claude.
the lady shall name a perilous labor for each of my sons. I'll wager a cast of emeralds that Thag returns first from his mission. What man of you would risk as many gems for Gallo?
There was a little silence, broken by the deep rumble of Quando's voice.
A cask of emeralds, weight for weight,
He said.
that young Prince Jorn will wed the lady.
King Claude's laughter shook the heavy walls.
Done and done, my stupid dwarf.
He bellowed.
The princess rose, curtsied to the king, and walked from the chamber.
Followed by Quando and the wizard.
As King Claude made to go, the royal recorder began in a quavering voice.
There is a tale that Taco tells.
Tell me no tale that Taco tells.
Said the king.
The ancient ass reported comets, which in truth were glowworms. His 100 clocks all chime by chance. He sets his sundials in the shade. Tell me no tale that Taco tells.
The royal high chamberlain entered the room.
Without knocking,
And bowed to the king.
and said,
The royal astronomer, sire,
he said,
seeks an immediate audience. Something has gone amiss in the skies.
Send him in. Send him in.
shouted Claude.
Don't stand there bowing and nodding your head. Send him in.
The royal high chamberlain bowed.
And nodded.
And withdrew.
My father loved this flourish and formality.
Said Claude.
I see no need for podgy go-betweens. If a man wants to come and see me, let him come and see me.
There was a knock on the door.
And Paz, the royal astronomer, came into the room.
He was a young pink-cheeked man in a pink robe.
And his pink eyes peered through pink lenses.
Huge pink comet, sire.
He said.
Just barely missed the earth. a little while ago. It made a wild woo. It made an awful hissing sound like hot iron stuck in water.
They aim these things at me.
said Claude.
Everything is aimed at me.
He strode out of the room and slammed the door with such force that all the ledgers flew open.
And all their leaves fluttered in the wind.
The next day,
When the sun was at the zenith,
The lost lady sat in a high carved golden chair in a great circular chamber reserved for royal ceremonies.
and commanded each of the three princes in turn to fall on bended knee before her.
while the king and the royal recorder looked on.
The princess spoke.
I commission you, Prince Stag, if you would win my hand to hunt and kill with single lance and all alone the great blue boar of Thedon Grove, in the forest of Jeopardy, and to bring its golden tusks to me and place them at my feet.
100 knights have lost their lives hunting the great blue boar of Thedon Grove in the forest of Jeopardy.
Cried Thag.
Does great Prince Thag hunt nothing more perilous than white deer?
The princess asked,
Thag bowed and kissed the maiden's hand.
and a moment later the thunder of his horse's hooves was heard in the circular chamber.
Gallo knelt in his turn.
The princess spoke.
I commission you, Prince Gallo, if you would win my hand, to overcome the seven-headed dragon of Dragor, which guards the sacred sword of Lorlau, and to bring back the sacred sword of Lorlau and place it at my feet. 100 knights have lost their lives striving to overcome the seven-headed dragon of Dragor.
He cried.
Does great Prince Gallo hunt nothing more perilous than white deer?
The princess asked,
Prince Gallo bowed and kissed the maiden's hand.
and a moment later the thunder of his horse's hoofs was heard in the circular chamber.
Bjorn was the last to kneel.
The princess spoke.
I commission you, Prince Bjorn, if you would win my heart and hand, to vanquish the muck which guards the cherry trees in the orchard of Chardor, 10 leagues from the castle gates, and to bring back a silver chalice filled with 1,000 cherries, and place it at my feet.
King Claude leaned forward in his great oaken chair.
The mock is a creature made of clay and sandalwood, constructed by my father's 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 father 300 years ago to scare rocks who used to strip the trees of cherries.
He cried.
100 children have carved their names on the dreadful mock in the cherry orchard of Chador.
Cried Bjorn.
Does the great Prince Bjorn hunt nothing less perilous than white deer?
The princess asked.
Bjorn bowed and kissed the maiden's hand.
And a moment later, the thunder of his horse's hoofs was heard in the circular chamber.
The princess rose, curtsied to the king,
and went up the winding stone stair to minister to the royal physician.
and to the castle wizard.
who, in trying to remove his own head and replace it, had succeeded only in straining his neck.
so that he had taken to his bed.
King Claude walked around the room, absently snapping the shields on the wall with his thumbnail and making them ring.
She has a lovely face.
He said,
I like the child. And yet, I had the oddest feeling she is watching me in soft alarm, like a creature peering through the underbrush.
the royal recorder put his right index finger alongside his nose.
Like a startled fawn, perhaps, trembling in the pussy willows.
He said. The king whirled on him.
No, not like a startled fawn trembling in the pussy willows.
He snarled.
I slept lightly all night long, hearing every chirp and squeal and hoot and rustle, and something that kept going clong off in that direction.
He pointed a little west of north.
I hear it every night.
They say the forest wizards bounce things off the moon. It could be that.
The royal recorder said. The king sighed.
A thing went ticking through my thoughts 1,000 times.
He said.
Tick, clong, tick, clong, tick, clong went the night.
He strode toward the royal recorder.
What is this tale that Taco tells?
He demanded. The royal recorder coughed.
The tale that Taco tells
He said.
is tortuous and tortured. It has its balances, its no's and yeses. It's this way, that way. It's tis and tisn't. It's can be, can't be. It's 6 of one and half dozen of the other.
Babble, babble, babble.
Said the king.
Blither, blither, blither. I have no time or mind for sophistries and riddles. Taco's tales go round and make less sense than whirligigs.
I'll do my best.
The royal recorder said,
And he told the tale of Taco's father's deer.
putting in 100 twists and tangents of his own.
The king turned from pink to purple as he listened.
And from purple to gray.
When at last he found his voice, he croaked.
Pray God, our deer is different from Taco's father's deer.
The royal recorder turned up the palms of his hands.
Sorceries, as Taco says, run in cycles. To put it another way, spells are set in sets and systems. What's true of one particular case is true of all peculiar cases of the same peculiar sort. If some knave had not removed my history of sorcery from its proper shelf, I could show you what I mean. The history was compiled by your father's recorder, and your father's recorder's father, and your father's recorder's father. It has no index and no glossary, and it's both dog-eared and foxed.
What's foxed?
The history of sorcery.
Said the royal recorder.
Aren't you listening?
I want to know what foxed means.
Awed Claude,
Oh, spotted.
said the recorder.
Oh, spotted.
mimicked the king.
It just happens that I have the history of sorcery in my chamber. I've been reading it at night when I couldn't sleep.
He clapped his hands, and a small man in yellow appeared.
And Claude instructed him to go to the royal bedchamber and bring down the history.
Get 3 men to help you.
Said Claude.
Persons removing the history of sorcery or other volumes from the royal library should fill out the proper form.
Said the royal recorder stiffly.
I won't be listed and labeled or tabbed and tagged.
Said Claude.
If I want a book, I'll get a book.
The king and the royal recorder began to pace up and down the room in opposite directions.
Grunting and sighing respectively as they passed each other.
Presently, 4 small men in yellow came into the room.
Stooping and staggering under the weight of an ancient and enormous volume of sorcery.
They set it down on the floor and left the room.
And the royal recorder began to turn the yellow, dusty pages.
Squinting and coughing.
There's nothing under deer,
He said at last.
except the record and report of maidens changed to deer and back again, all nice and neat and normal, all neat and nice and formal. In every case, the disenchanted lady knew her name. It says so here.
Look under something else then.
Roared the king.
Such as,
The royal recorder asked.
for instance, an example.
Look under loss of maiden's memory.
Bawled Claude.
Look under L.
Loss in this special case comes under M.
The royal recorder said.
How does and can and could it?
Thundered Claude. The royal recorder's voice was prim and firm.
The proper listing, sire, is quote, memory, maidens, loss of, stop, unquote.
The king closed his left eye and then opened it.
And closed his right eye.
His voice was low and ominous.
I do not have the slightest doubt that pussycat comes under Q and monkey muddle under R and donkey daddle under S. Look up the sorry secret of this nameless child under X or Y or Z, but look it up.
The shields on the wall trembled.
The royal recorder turned to the M's
And ran through magic,
Miracle.
mystery,
and mumps,
Before he found at last what he was looking for.
wedged in between mice and mountebank.
The king paced up and down.
While the recorder read a dozen pages, exclaiming,
Ah,
And
oh,
and
oh,
and
ah.
until King Claude shouted,
stop your whinkering and read me what it says.
the royal recorder shook his head.
You just get mad. It's full of clauses and phrases and pauses and marginal notes and inner quotes and words like in Latin and words in Greek like vis and ibid and circa and sick.
Sum it up then. Sum it up
Roared Claude.
in language workaday and commonplace without a lot of tweedle-twee and tweedle-twa.
The royal recorder flushed.
We have here under M
He said,
the tale of 9 enchantments in which a deer of the woods and fields was changed into a woman,
Why were they?
demanded Claude.
the royal recorder spoke slowly and patiently.
1, because the deer had saved a wizard's life. 2, because the wicked wizard wished to play a woeful prank on men.
If I were king of all the world,
Said Claude.
I'd make an end of sorcery and break my backbone in the try. In such confusion and caprice, who knows his hound dog from his niece?
2 things are true.
The royal recorder said.
In all these 9 enchantments, first, the maidens had no names. They had a memory of trees and fields and a memory of nothing more.
Ha!
Said Claude.
Moreover, too, and furthermore, the spells were all the same in every strange and single case, herein set forth and down, and herein set down and forth. The deer was chased and closely pressed and had nowhere to flee.
Oh,
Said Claude.
Whereupon, and then and there, the deer was changed into a maid, a tall and dark and lovely maid, a veritable princess to the sight.
boy.
Groaned Claude, and he sat down heavily on a stool.
The recorder walked up and down and stood still and raised his hand.
These false females, these mock maidens, these will-o'-the-wisp women, these pseudo princesses have one disturbing power in common.
What power is this?
Croaked Claude.
Love them truly, love them well. Nothing then can break the spell.
The royal recorder paused a moment and then went on.
But if love should fail them thrice, they would vanish in a trice.
Claude jumped to his feet and strode up and down the chamber.
Take an edict.
He said at last.
The royal recorder found ink and a quill behind a cobweb on a shelf
And drew a parchment from behind a shield.
and sat on the floor and crossed his legs.
Claude closed his eyes and said,
Write it plain and write it clear. No son of mine shall wed a deer.
A deer in any form or figment,
said the royal recorder.
or guise or getup, or shape or seeming, or image or effigy, mockery or make-believe.
Who's issuing this edict?
Demanded Claude.
The recorder's voice was flat and firm.
It's far too clear.
He said.
It should be writ in such a way that if you ever changed your mind, the point could be disowned, denied, and disavowed.
Erase the edict.
Said the king.
He looked sad for a moment and then guffawed.
Our quandary has its sorrowful side indeed. Yet half my kingdom would I give to see the face of Thag, the second huntsman of his time, waking to behold on the pillow next to his the day the spell is broken, not raven locks and ruby lips, but hairy ears and velvet nostrils.
Force of the king's laughter caused them to bounce from wall to wall of the chamber like a ball in a box.
His laughter and his bouncing increased as he thought of Gallo and then of Jorn.
Face to face with the lady in her true form and substance.
A creature of the fen and not the fireside.
The bog and not the boudoir.
The salt lick and not the silver bowl.
The king controlled himself long enough to say,
the thing that amuses me in all this farce and fancies, the thought of Jorn of the lute and lyre, discovering he has won the heart and hoof of the swiftest deer in Christendom.
He sat down on a chair and rubbed the tears of merriment from his eyes.
The royal recorder took a turn across the chamber and back again, stirring the candle flames.
Claude sighed 3 times.
The damsel has lighted lights inside my heart. There's no denying that.
He said.
I wish I could decree she never was a deer.
You can't do that,
said the royal recorder.
What can I do?
Asked Claude.
Wait and see what you shall see, and watch what you shall watch, remembering that one is once, and 2 is twice, and 3 is thrice, and swifter than the twinkling is the trice.
Yammer, yammer, yammer,
said the king.
I've had my fill of yammering. We must advise this princess she's a deer. Perhaps she'll have the grace to disappear.
She can't do that.
The shocked recorder said.
By your decree, the creature set a set of perils for your sons. She now awaits the swiftest one. The thing is simply done and done.
I thought she was a dear princess at the time,
said Claude. The royal recorder shrugged.
Insofar and inasmuch as your decree has made it such, she is a princess, sire,
he said.
De facto and pro tem.
The king raised his head and gave the great
Harrow
of a lion tortured by magical mice.
He strode so heavily to the door that the shields jangled on the wall.
I hope that all my sons get lost,
said Claude.
That's one way out.
It is for them,
the royal recorder said.
But not for you. You'd have the pretty creature
tortured by magical mice
until the day the great dark planet Taco Saw goes bump against the world and kills us all.
King Claude sighed
and scowled
and snarled.
That was no great dark planet Taco Saw, but just a falling leaf or a flying bird. Why must good King Claude be plagued by blind buffoons and dusty clowns and all the wicked wizards in the world?
He rushed out of the room
and slammed the door with such force
that the wind blew the royal recorder
flat on his face on the floor.
We beg your indulgence for a very brief intermission of 5 minutes.
Part 3, The Perilous Labor of Prince Thag.
A road that Prince Thag followed dwindled to a zigzag path.
that zigzagged through a growth of gnarled and toppling trees.
Like figures frozen in a dance.
From all the trees, a sticky, thickish liquid dripped and oozed.
And gave
Or rather lent,
the air a heavy Swedish fragrance.
for the Swedish heavy fragrance died and rose.
And died again and rose.
And died and rose again.
This heavish, sweety fragrance
Thag muttered to himself.
that rises or that roses isn't fit for human noses. And it tricks the minds of men. 3 times 2 is 8,
He said,
and 1 is 10.
A furry bluish smoke came drifting through the trees in rings and hoops and collars.
I distrust this stickish, thicky stuff.
the tall prince bit his lip.
Hags, Thad, enough.
A lousy moon globbers in the pipe trees.
Said a voice in a tone which for one reason or another aggravated had.
I'm up here in the crouch of the tree.
The voice continued,
Crotch, you mean,
said Thag.
catching sight of a roundish, balding man a few feet above him.
On the contrary,
Said the man,
a crunch is what you do meet in aching.
That's wince.
said Thag angrily.
A mince is what you do to words.
The round man retorted,
It's glibbers in any case,
said Thag haughtily.
not globbers, as you said. The word is in the pleasant trance.
Ah, but you speak of mood.
Said the round man.
I was referring to the moon. It is important to mind your D's and N's in these particular woods, which are not too particular, if you grasp me.
Nobody's grabbing you.
Said Thag. He showed his upper teeth.
Furthermore, I resent your preferring to it as a peasant trench.
The other stared down at Thag.
I don't care what you say.
He said coldly,
I say glibbers.
high up in a tree, a chalk climbed slowly,
I wonder what type it is.
said Thag.
It's sick, thirsty,
Said the man.
or half past hate, or a quarter to fight. I'm in no mood for questions.
You're in no mood.
Said Thag.
First he accosts me, then he tells me what I'm not in.
Said the man.
I crutch in the crouch of this tree to avoid troublemakers like you riding on their nagamuffins.
You are thinking of ragmudgeons.
Said Thag with dignity.
Now he tells me what I'm thinking of.
Said the man.
And crouch is what you do, not where you are.
Said Thag.
How can I do anything where I am not?
Asked the man.
I have half a mind to come down and trounce you.
Thag laughed. That's
That's right.
whined the man.
Laugh at a man with only half a mind.
He sniffled.
A man with a crutch.
You crouch in a crotch, but you have no crutch.
Said Thag.
The man burst into tears.
That's right.
He bawled.
Laugh at a man man because he has no crutch.
He shook his fist at Theg and cried,
A plague on both your horses.
4 red birds in a tangle bush sang,
Verti, Verti, Verti,
as Theg closed his mouth
And held his breath.
and shut his eyes.
and galloped on through the stingish, ringy smoke.
And the trickish, sicky smell.
And after a long moment, he rode out of the growth of gnarled and toppling trees.
And beheld before his eyes the shining valley of Euphoria.
The air sparkled with the high, fine sparkle of crystal.
Which made the 3 men who approached Theg seem larger than they really were.
The 3 men stood beside Theg's horse
And bowed.
And smiled.
and bowed.
Thag saw that each man held in his hand a mask exactly like his face.
But the first mask was stern.
The second mask was sad.
And the third mask was solemn.
The first man giggled. The second man chuckled. And
The,
the third man chortled.
the first man bowed and spoke.
We wear our masks on yesterdays and on tomorrows.
The second man said.
And since those sad days never come,
The third man said.
We know no sorrows.
He waved his mask at Thag.
My name is Wag, and this is Gag, and that is Jag.
My name
said Theg,
is Thag.
A lovely name.
said Wag,
A charming name.
said Jag. A truly gorgeous name.
Said Jag.
I wish I thought of it myself.
Welcome to Euphoria,
Said Wag.
the sweetest little land in all the world. 100 million welcomes, Thag. You are the finest, greatest prince that we have ever known.
You do not know me well.
said Theg,
We know you perfectly.
said Wag,
We know you wonderfully,
Said Jag.
we know you beautifully,
said Jag. Thag frowned.
I seek the way to Theoden Grove in the forest of jeopardy.
he said.
I must ride on. My time is short.
Jeopardy is so far away, you'll never reach it in a day
said Wag,
or in a month.
or in a year.
Jag.
We know the place, a truly gorgeous place,
A charming place,
Said Gag.
a lovely place.
said Wag,
Thag grew restless on his restless horse.
Tell me, are the perils worse? And have the monsters grown?
And the 3 men placed their arms about each other's shoulders.
and laughed until they cried.
Cried until they laughed again.
The perils and the monsters
Wag.
are neither here nor there nor anywhere. Forget the perils,
Gag.
Dismiss the monsters.
chortled Jag.
The 3 men laughed and cried again.
And cried and laughed.
Which way to jeopardy?
Yelled Thag in such a voice that the laughter and the crying stopped,
It's straight ahead.
said Wag,
Ride by the by,
Said Gag.
and pass the time of day.
said Jag.
The 3 men began to giggle and chuckle and chortle again,
as Thag galloped away
straight ahead,
and on,
through the green valley, which was loud with the sound of gaiety
and joy,
and jollity.
and frolic and frivolity.
He rode by the by
a merry, sparkling stream,
and passed the time of day.
A great clock on whose dial was painted a laughing face.
the hills fell away on either side,
And the grass changed.
From green to brown and then to gray.
A jolly man at the far end of the valley of Euphoria cried
carpe diem,
as Thag flashed by.
The road was rough and rocky now.
geese gaggled by,
And thorns fell from thorn trees and stuck point down in the earth like daggers.
As Thag drew near the edge of jeopardy, the weather underwent a fearful change.
There was a mist of moss to ride through and a storm of glass.
hurricanes and monsoons, and tidal waves came in from the sea.
Tornadoes and cyclones tore up the crust of the earth.
And minstrels descended from the mountains.
There was a musical stream to swim.
Whose soft waters swayed so somnolently,
That
sang so sweetly.
Thag had to struggle savagely against drowsiness and death by drowning.
His black horse whinnied with fear,
But the king's son urged him on.
and the horse galloped through the perilous woods.
A great wind came up from the earth.
Trees fell before the horse and rider,
And behind them,
and on both sides of them.
Great holes opened and closed in the earth like giants' mouths.
But Thag guided his horse around them and over them and between them.
fire swept the forest.
But Thag sped through it safely.
Hailstones as large as chalices fell all around,
But he avoided them,
Lightning flashed,
and thunder rolled.
and the rain came down in torrents.
but Prince Thag rode on.
At last, the black trees of Thedon Grove loomed up, the haunt of the great blue boar.
Thag dismounted, lance in hand, and crept forward cautiously.
His ears were deafened by a terrible sound.
The sound of snoring, rising and falling.
Gripping his lance tightly, Thag moved toward the sound.
Which seemed to come from the foot of an obob tree.
To Prince Thag's high astonishment, the enormous blue boar of Thedon Grove
Which slept only 30 winks in every 30 years.
was snoring under the obob tree.
His great eyes closed, his huge sides heaving.
Thag stepped forward softly and swiftly.
But the monster, dreaming of danger, opened one eye and struggled to its feet.
With a mighty scar.
It was too late. Thag's lance was on its sure way to the blue boar's heart.
The blue boar of Thedon Grove toppled over on its side with such force that he dug his own grave.
Thag reached down and broke off the golden tusks as easily as if they were icicles.
A moment later, he was riding back through the menacing woods.
Round rocks 10 feet in diameter crossed
And
and crisscrossed his path.
and birds in vast numbers flew at Thag's head.
opening and closing their scissor-like beaks.
The prince and his black charger evaded the boulders and the buzz birds with marvelous jumps and dodgings.
And broke at last into the clear.
And raced for the castle of his father.
The golden tusks of the great blue boar shining in his hands.
From a tall window in a high room of King Claude's castle, the princess watched.
With wide eyes and trembling body.
The road her suitors had taken.
To where it split into separate directions, like a branching candlestick.
Thag had followed the road to the right.
Gallo
To the road to the left.
and Jorn had traveled straight ahead.
As far as the mysterious maiden's eyes could see, there was no cloud of dust on any road, no sight of horse or man.
She watched the middle road with hope and eagerness.
The roads that branched to the right and left with terror and dismay.
In his shadowy shop, Taco sat quietly.
Trying to think of chill and fragile rhymes for time and sorrow.
The royal wizard squatted on the floor of his room in a tower.
Trying to change a piece of common field stone into gold by wiggling his fingers at it and crying.
Jesus!
Nothing happened.
A royal physician,
Still lying in bed, insulting and reassuring himself,
Tried to stick out his tongue far enough to see whether or not it was coated.
come. We can stick our tongue out farther than that, can't we?
He asked cheerily.
No, we can't.
he replied sullenly.
In the royal library, the royal recorder sat on a tall stool at a high desk.
And made an entry in his private diary.
On this day, it has been established, despite of hissing and fretting and bawling and moaning from you know who, that the so-called princess we have been entertaining in the castle since the night before last is in truth and fact, by birth and destiny, a common deer. The discovery of this sorrowful secret of the unhappy beast was made by me.
King Claude sat all alone at the head of the long table in the banquet hall, cracking walnuts between his thumb and forefinger.
And meditating on the advisability of taking a little wine before visiting the princess to acquaint her of her pitiful plight.
He decided it would not be a good idea to call for wine and went on cracking walnuts.
As he turned the dilemma over in his mind,
His eyes brightened and darkened.
And brightened and darkened. He cracked his last walnut and ate it slowly.
shell and all.
And slapped the table with his hand.
And the silver bowl that held the walnuts jumped off the table and cackled on the floor.
Steward,
Called Claude,
wine.
High up in a leafy tree where he could not be seen, Quando scanned the three roads that led to peril.
by turning his head to the left and peering through the leaves, he could see the princess standing at the tall window in the high room.
In the royal gamekeeper's lodge, the royal gamekeeper's wife rearranged crocks on a shelf.
talking to the royal gamekeeper over her shoulder.
I don't believe a word of it. I don't care what you say. She never was a dear, if you ask me. They made this story up to cloak their goings on. You men are all alike. Enchanted princess, indeed, enchanted hussy. I know her kind. She loitered in the woods and waved at them.
The royal gamekeeper's wife picked up a crock.
And rubbed it vigorously with a cloth.
And set it down again.
Dainty, you say she is. I say she's dirty. And as for being 21, she's nearer 30.
The gamekeeper's wife wiped and wiped and wiped another crock.
That castle surely needs a woman's touch. It's full of broken glass and spider webs. Too bad her royal highness had to die. Poor thing. I always say he struck her in his cups.
She stepped back from the shelf and regarded her handiwork.
If she is a princess, then I have no doubt she's one of King Puggy's daughters, eldest of the 7, I should say. She's pretty in their bold and brazen way. Oh, what's the matter? Has the leopard got your tongue?
The royal
royal
gamekeeper
gamekeeper
did not answer.
He was sitting in a chair,
His hands folded on his stomach.
Fast asleep.
Part 4. The Perilous Labor of Prince Gallo.
Prince Gallo's way led to the left and then to the right and then to the left again.
And he came at last to a white path through a peaceful wood.
As he jingled along the path, Gallo stared in amazement at a kind of forest he had never seen before.
The trees were hung with signs and legends.
Lost babes found,
Giants killed while you wait.
7 league boots, now $6.98.
let us waken your sleeping beauty.
We put you on an urn. Men put you on a pedestal.
Consult painting and young.
Seek Grailo, even better than the true Grail.
Couch pie, pumpkin wheels, horse traps, mice shoes.
The sign that most interested the gaping Gallo read,
Visit the 7-headed dragon of Dragor, free except moon days and fay days.
as Gallo gazed about in wild wonder,
A man wearing a silver cap and a garment made of brass saluted him,
Your parchments, brother?
said the man in metal.
I am not your brother, and my name is Prince Gallo.
Said the perplexed prince.
In the land, in the forest of Wilby, all men are brothers.
The man said,
This sounds friendly, but confusing.
said Gallo.
I have no parchments, brother.
The man looked grave for a moment, then closed one eye and spoke in a low voice.
You have the semblance of a gentleman of intelligence and wit.
He said,
Now, it just happens that I have an extra set of proper parchments that I will let you have for a song.
What song shall I sing?
said Gallo.
In the forest of Wilby, a song is 3 large emeralds.
The man replied.
Have you 3 large emeralds?
From a sack on his saddle, Gallo extracted 3 emeralds and gave them to the man.
Who thereupon handed the prince a red parchment, a blue parchment, and a white parchment.
Give the red parchment to the man in white. Give the blue parchment to the man in red. And the white parchment to the man in blue.
He said.
It's less simple that way for everybody.
The man in metal touched a finger to his cap and walked away.
Gallo rode along the edge of the woods until he came to another path.
And he rode down the path until he came to a man in white.
Gallo gave the man in white the red parchment.
Will you point me the way that leads to the 7-headed dragon of Tagore?
Asked the prince.
The man in white was staring at the red parchment.
This is not a true and proper parchment.
Said the man in white.
The seal is missing, the signature is doubtful, and the symbol is yesterday's.
He was grave for a moment.
Then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice.
You have the semblance of a gentleman of courage and nobility.
He said.
You'll journey on a mission of high peril, or I am dressed in green. Now, I could tear this parchment up and let you pass, and make no cross for you there on that tree to show a knight has gone this way, but that's too safe for your discomfort and for mine. I'll change the seal and signature and symbol to make the parchment proper. And all this for a song, brother. All this for a song. It's more perilous that way for everybody.
Prince Gallo sighed and gave the man the 3 emeralds from his sack.
And rode on till he came to the man in blue.
The man in blue took the white parchment and was grave for a moment. Then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice.
You have the semblance of a man of learning and discernment, brother.
He said.
But I can't let you pass until you prove your power to read. And how can you or I or anyone read this?
He gave the parchment back to Gallo.
Who saw that the writing on it could be read only by holding it up to a mirror.
I cannot read these words unless I have a looking glass.
Prince Gallo cried.
A man in blue produced from his sleeve a silver and ivory mirror.
And handed it to the frowning prince.
Now read the legend in the glass,
He said.
Gallo tucked the parchment under his chin and held the mirror before him and read.
Forget the past. Enjoy the present. The future will take care of itself.
Prince Gallo let the parchment drift to the ground.
I have a strange feeling that I am neither here nor there,
Read.
and that this is neither now nor then. I am caught somewhere between the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow.
The man in blue looked grave for a moment.
That is because you have ridden out of the past into the future.
He said. He closed one eye,
In giving up was for will be, you have lost am.
spoke in a low voice.
You have had the past. You behold the future about you, but you have no present. And how it just happens that you hold in your hand a very fine present, a present of ivory and silver, fit for a princess. Vulcan gave it to Venus, who left it to Cleopatra, who gave it to Isolde, who bequeathed it to my grandmother. I will let you have it for a song.
Prince Gallo sighed, drew 3 emeralds from his sack, and gave them to the man in blue.
Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor?
He asked patiently.
Turn right, then right, then right, then right.
Said the man in blue.
But that would take me around in a square and bring me back to where I am now.
Said Gallo.
It's much more impressive that way for everybody.
Said the man in blue as he walked away, clinking his emeralds.
The second son of Claude rode around the square paths as he had been directed.
And when he came back to where he had started from, he found a man in red waiting for him.
Your blue parchment,
Said the man in red. Gallo handed him the parchment.
Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor that guards the sacred sword of Lorelei?
The prince inquired.
the man in red spoke gravely, looked grave for a moment.
Then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice.
You have the semblance of a gentleman of shrewdness and cunning.
He said.
Close your eyes, brother.
Gallo closed his eye, and the man in red concealed the blue parchment under a stone.
Open your eyes, brother.
He said.
And Gallo opened his eyes.
Do you see the blue parchment that I hold in my hand?
Asked the man.
No, you do not. For it, I have made it invisible. In the same manner, I can make you and your horse invisible, so that you can ride up to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor and take the sacred sword of Lorelei without being seen. This service I will perform for 3 songs.
Gallo took 9 emeralds from his sack
Which left him only 12.
and gave them to the man in red.
You are invisible now, and neither man nor dragon can see you.
Said the other.
It is more deceptive that way for everybody.
Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor?
Demanded Gallo.
The hard way.
Said the man in red.
Down and down, round and round through the moaning grove of Artanis.
How shall I know this grove?
Asked Gallo.
By its red roses and its million moons and its blue houses, in each of which sits a solitary maiden moaning for her lover who is far away. Fear not the roaring of the dreadful Tachamed, nor yet the whuffing puffing of the surly Nasselbooper, but ride straight on.
And When I have passed through the grove,
asked the prince.
Turn to the right and follow a little white light.
Said the man in red as he walked away, jiggling his emeralds.
Gallo rode and rode till he came to the grove of Artemis.
And the scent of the red roses assailed his nostrils.
The light of the million moons blinded his eyes.
And the moaning of the lonely maidens deafened his ears.
So that he galloped as fast as his horse could go until he came to a winding road and turned to the right.
In front of him appeared suddenly a little white light.
And he followed it round and down and down.
Presently, Prince Gallo heard the sound of many people talking
And laughing
and shouting.
and singing.
And he saw tables along the side of the road spread with fruits and meats.
And other tables piled with baubles
And gewgaws.
and gimcracks and kickshaws.
New to his sight and strange to his memory.
On the trees hung heavy musical instruments he had never dreamed of.
And the people were dressed in a remarkable fashion and danced in a remarkable way.
Down and down and round and round.
Above the sound of the people rose a furious and alarming buzzing and whirring.
And ringing and thumping,
Here you are, brother.
cried a man dressed in black and blue.
And he held out a set of small spheres to Gallo.
7 balls for 12 emeralds. Try your luck.
You hand me these spheres,
Said Gallo in a puzzled tone.
yet you cannot see me, for I have been made invisible.
Of course I see you.
Said the man.
Plain as day, big as life, ugly as sin. Buy the balls and toss them in.
I don't understand what you are saying.
Said the bewildered prince.
Look, brother,
The man.
12 emeralds gets you 7 balls. You throw the balls at the 7-headed dragon of Dragor in that striped tent yonder, the greatest mechanical wonder of the age. Meaningless, but marvelous. The 7 heads go round and down and down. Try your luck. Try your skill. Toss a ball into each of the 7 heads, and you win the genuine and only sacred sword of Lorlau. A ball in 6, 2 golden bricks. 5 in dandy, a box of candy. 4, a key, and 3, a rose. And so it goes, and so it goes.
The man gave the 7 balls to Gallo and took his sack of emeralds.
You can't win, brother,
He said.
and I can't lose. That makes it fair and square for everybody.
He looked grave for a moment.
Then closed one eye and spoke in a low voice.
You have the semblance of a gentleman of honor and integrity.
Said.
Now, if the great key in the side of the mechanical dragon is not wound, the 7 heads will not go round and round and down and down. And you can toss a ball in each of the 7 heads and win the sacred sword. In return for this little service and secret, I ask only for the golden saddle I see there on your horse.
Gallo was so confused he could not say a word.
He strode into the striped tent, and there he saw the 7-headed dragon.
Its heads now motionless.
Their mouths open
Between the claws of its great feet lay the glittering sword for which he had endured so much.
One after another, Gallo tossed the balls into each until each had dropped into a separate gaping mouth.
Then he walked over and picked up the sacred sword of Lorelei and left the striped tent.
As he did so, a small, tired man appeared,
Walked to an iron chest,
opened it,
Took out one of 100 identical swords.
and placed it between the paws of the mechanical dragon.
he yawned and shuffled away.
Outside the striped tent, the man in black and blue waved gaily at Gallo.
As the prince mounted the bare back of his black horse and rode swiftly the way he had come,
Up the winding road,
past the little white light
Through the grove of Artanis,
and along the many paths,
until at last he broke out of the forest of Wilby and galloped for the castle of his father.
the sacred sword of Lorelei shining in his hand.
the princess,
Standing at the tall window in the high room of King Claude's castle,
strained her eyes and held her hand to her wild heart.
She tried to pray, but
since she had a memory of trees and fields and a memory of nothing more,
she found no prayer to say.
The princess tried again to remember her name, and she could not.
a black doubt crept into her mind and heart.
Perhaps she was in truth a nameless waif,
A woman of the fields or kitchen,
changed into a deer by some woods or castle wizard whom she had unwittingly offended.
While milking a cow or serving broth,
if so, it might have been the wicked wizard's whim to cast a spell that only a king's 3 sons in hot pursuit could break.
Perhaps the sorcerer had laughed and said,
3 sons of a famous king will break your spell and break their hearts, and then your own. For who would have a milkmaid for his bride?
Perhaps the true disenchantment would come
When the swiftest prince should place his trophy at her feet and cry, I claim your heart and hand.
perhaps then she herself could and would confess.
my name is such and such, and I'm a peasant.
Or
My name is so and so, and I'm a scullery maid.
She hoped if this were to be the awful ending of her cruel enchantment, that Thag or Gallo and that Jorn would be the first to cry, I claim your heart and hand.
but in spite of these dark thoughts, the eyes of the nameless maiden peered down the straight road Jorn had taken.
Shadows lay across the road,
Spreading and thickening like black blood.
but there was no sign of dust.
No mark of horse or man.
The princess forced herself to look to the left and then to the right.
Nothing moved except the shadows of trees stirring in the wind along the road Gallo had taken.
But the prince almost cried out when she saw what she thought was a cloud of dust on the road Thag had followed.
It rose slowly above the trees.
And she saw that it was only a swan flying.
The princess placed her hands over her eyes.
And shivered. We beg your indulgence for a very brief intermission of 5 minutes.
5. The perilous labor of Prince Jorn.
Away to the cherry orchard lay straight and smooth as a legend for Prince Jorn.
with only a small twist here and a little jog there.
The sun shone warmly,
The wind blew softly,
A cock crowed,
and the children called far away.
and overhead the birds sang.
in one place, a storm of paper cut in fragilely beautiful designs of snowflakes blew dreamily across the road.
And in another, a wolf raised his head and howled.
Enabling Joy to see that the creature wore a collar.
And the youngest son of King Claude rode sorrowfully on his mission in spite of his love for the princess.
For he did not believe the labor set for him held perils worthy of his strength and courage.
Any child can pluck 1,000 cherries and place them in a silver chalice.
He said aloud.
Any moon-crazed idiot could overthrow the artificial mock-mock made of clay and sandalwood to frighten birds away. I would meet the blue boar face to face, or slay the dreadful dragon with the 7 heads. Set me a difficult riddle, a terrible task, a valiant knight to overthrow.
As Prince Jorn ended his plate, he heard a voice calling high and shrill.
He looked all about him, but he could see no one.
And still the voice kept crying.
Help me, Jorn, and you shall have a difficult riddle, a terrible task, and a valiant knight to overthrow. Help me, Jorn.
The prince looked left and right,
And north and south,
And down and up,
and when he looked up, he saw her.
a witch caught on the highest branch of a tree, crying piteously.
a witch hung high in the air like a smoky lantern.
Prince Jorn dismounted and climbed the tree.
And lifted the witch from the highest branch.
And carried her safely to the ground.
I was riding the whirlwind
She said,
and got caught in this tree and lost my broom, and woe was me.
Jorn looked all around and realized at last
That the witch's broom must have fallen into a clump of tall plants called witch's broom.
because they looked so much like a witch's broom.
it took him a long time to find the witch's broom in the witch's broom.
But he stumbled on it at last and returned it to its owner.
For your kindness, Prince Jorn,
Said the witch as she mounted her broom.
you shall have a difficult riddle to do, a terrible task to undergo, a valiant knight to overthrow.
He waved her long bony fingers and sailed away, her shrill laughter trailing behind her,
Jorn rode along the straight and smooth way.
until he came to where a sphinx crouched beside the road.
Name me a riddle, Sphinx.
Said Jorn.
The stony eyes of the sphinx stared straight ahead.
And its stony jaws did not move.
But it spoke.
What is whirly? What is curly? Tell me, what is pearly early?
Jorn replied in a trice.
Gigs are whirly, cues are curly, and the dew is pearly early.
He rode on a little way and then rode back.
What was difficult about that riddle?
Asked the prince.
It was difficult to say without moving my jaws.
Said the sphinx.
Jorn shrugged his shoulders and continued on his way.
Until he came all of a sudden upon the great cherry orchard.
He dismounted, unslung the silver chalice from his saddle, and strode into the orchard.
The chalice in his left hand, his sword in his right.
In a clearing, in the middle of the cherry orchard, lay the mock on its left side.
The winds had blown it over,
The rains had crumpled its clay.
And the worms had eaten its sandalwood.
the head of the mock had broken off in its fall, and larks nested in the hollow eyes.
An enormous rock perched drowsily on the shattered monster's flank.
And Jorn drove it off with the point of his sword.
Not far away
In a rusting suit of armor,
lay the dusty bones of a knight.
Who had died of terror in the days when the mock had been new and awful to look upon.
Jorn saw that the branches of all the trees hung close to the ground under the weight of the bright red fruit they bore.
And he wondered that cherries could be so heavy.
he dropped his sword in the grass,
First with one hand,
and then with both.
he tried to pull a cherry from the stem to put it in the silver chalice.
And discovered that it was not a cherry at all, but a ruby in the shape of a cherry.
All the cherries on all the trees were rubies.
And none of them would come off the stems, no matter how hard he tugged.
And none of the stems would come off the branches.
You must count 1,000 to pick 1,000 cherries.
Said a voice behind Jorn.
And the prince turned to see a small man in a peaked hat looking at him.
His large eyes twinkling.
Say 1, 2, 3.
Said the man.
1, 2, 3.
Jorn.
4, 5, 6.
Said the man.
4, 5, 6.
Said Jorn. And when he had counted rapidly up to 1,000, a ruby fell into the silver chalice.
But 1,000 is 1,000,000.
Said Jorn.
And to count to 1,000,000 is a terrible task.
A terrible task you wished for. A terrible task you have.
Said the man.
Jorn counted to 1,000 again.
And again, a ruby fell into the chalice.
1, 2, 3, 4. I came to pick cherries. 5, 6, 7, 8. And I find rubies. 9, 10.
Said Jorn.
Rubies, cherries, cherries, rubies.
Said the small man.
It is the same thing.
11, 12. How is it the same thing?
Asked Jorn.
13, 14, 15, 16.
The small man paced up and down and said,
What am I doing?
17, 18, 19, 20. You are walking back and forth.
Said Jorn.
21.
But how can I walk back and forth without first walking forth and back?
It's the same thing.
Said Jorn.
A man who walks 22, forth and back 23, is walking back and forth 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30.
If forth and back are the back and forth, then back is forth and forth is back.
Said the small one.
I do not see how that helps me in this terrible task.
Said Jorn. He finished counting his third 1,000, and a third cherry dropped into the silver chalice.
At this slow pace, Thag will ride home ahead of me with the golden tusks of the great blue boar, and Gallo will ride home ahead of me with the sacred sword of Laurlau, and one of them will marry the princess, while I still count cherries into my chalice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
The small man sat on the ground and looked at the prince and listened as he counted to his 4,000.
And the fourth cherry fell into the silver chalice.
Jorn began to count again.
50 princes in 50 years have come to this orchard to gather cherries or rubies for this princess or that,
Said the small man.
and not one of them has used logic in his labor. I am not a prince, and I cannot make the cherries fall, or the rubies, if you will. I have let the other 50 princes pluck the fruit or the jewels their own way, because it is worth counting to 1,000,000 for the heart and hand of a lovely lady. With you, my friend, we have this fag to think of, and this gallows. There is a logical secret to the falling of the cherries. I cannot tell it outright, but I can ask you questions.
Or is it 348, 349, 353?
Said Jorn.
What question would you ask?
Does a cherry drop when you say 99?
No,
Does a cherry fall when you say 999?
no.
When does a cherry or a ruby fall?
351. When I say 1,000.
Said Jorn. A ruby dropped into his silver chalice.
1,000.
And cried Jorn again, and another ruby dropped.
1,000, 1,000, 1,000.
And 4 more rubies fell into the chalice.
In no time at all.
Or to be exact, in 1,000th of the time it would have taken for him to count to 1,000,000 by ones.
Jorn had filled the chalice with 1,000 rubies.
He looked around to thank the small man in the peaked cap, but he was nowhere to be seen.
Instead, there stood before Jorn a knight in black armor.
The tallest and strongest black knight that the young prince had ever seen.
Name me your name, Black Knight.
Cried Jorn.
I am Duff of the Dolorous Doom.
Thundered a great voice under the gleaming casque, which covered all save the dark eyes of the Black Knight.
50 princes have I fought beneath these trees, and live to tell the tale.
Jorn put down the silver chalice and picked up his sword.
I am armed all in steel. Sets not the balance in my favor.
Mumbled the Black Knight.
Jorn raised his sword.
The Black Knight kept his own sword at his side.
There's magic here, I warn you, Prince. What's mightier than magic?
Miracle.
What's miracle?
The Black Knight.
Love's miracle enough.
Armor, Prince, is stronger stuff.
The Black Knight raised his sword swiftly, and steel rang against steel.
Duff swung his sword above his head with both hands as a man swings an axe,
and brought it down so savagely that it whined in the air.
But Jorn stepped quickly to one side and thrust at a chink he detected in the Black Knight's armor just under the right shoulder.
Duff brought up his sword barely in time to strike Jorn's sword away.
Time and again, he lunged and swung and thrust.
And time and again, Jorn parried the thrusts and sidestepped the swinging steel.
Stabbing at the chink in Duff's armor whenever it gaped open.
Once, when a lightning thrust threw Jorn off balance,
The Black Knight would have cleft his head to his chin.
Had he not in turn been thrown off balance by stumbling against the chalice of rubies, scattering them in the green grass,
the battle surged and circled.
In and out among the trees.
with great ringing and flashing of steel,
The point of Jorn's sword struck like a bright snake at the chink in the Black Knight's armor.
which opened and closed like a small mouth as he lunged and drew back and lunged again.
The Black Knight began to breathe harder and harder. His thrusts were slower and slower.
And he no longer lifted the sword high over his head for the cruel slashing strokes.
Which in the first hour of the battle had fallen close to Jorn's body.
At last, the Black Knight raised his sword above his head with both hands.
For a stroke that would have cut the young prince in two like an apple.
And swift as light, Jorn's sword darted for the chink under the right shoulder.
The sword point cut deep, and the Black Knight's weapon fell to the ground.
His right arm swung uselessly by his side like a pendulum.
The massive figure in black steel staggered and fell to the grass with a great clangor.
The casque that had hidden all save the dark eyes of the Black Knight was wrenched loose.
And rolled over and over, stopping when it clanked against the silver chalice.
Prince Jorn saw
To his amazement and horror,
that the head and face revealed to him were the head and face of a man of 70 years.
Jorn knelt beside his fallen foe, sorrowful and full of sorrow and regret.
and held the knight's head in his arms.
I would not have fought so venerable a knight had I known,
Said Jorn.
You fought the fearful thing I seemed to be, and that's the test and proof of valor. That's the proof and test. When all is dark within the house, who knows the monster from the mouse?
The Black Knight's voice was no longer thundered, but was small and thin,
Jorn helped the old man to his feet.
and staunched the blood and bound his wound.
What may I trust?
Cried Jorn.
What's there to trust?
Ah, trust your heart.
The old man said.
Trust love. 50 years ago, I undertook a fearful labor for a lady's love. Armored all in pride and arrogance, I sought to meet the dreadful Mok face to face, and came upon this armless thing of wood and clay. Then love's a whim, I cried, and man's a fool. The peril and the labor, Prince, lie not in dreadful monsters or mighty deeds, but in the keeping of the heart a man has won. This is the dolorous doom of one who rode not home to claim his lady's hand, that each and every Maytime till I die, I must be overthrown by love, which once I overthrew.
Jorn was silent for a while, for a little space, and then he said,
One of your brothers then came back with golden tusks or a silver sword and won the lady's hand.
the old man shivered in his armor.
She never wed, but sat with owls by day and cats by night, peering far and near and crying, hark. Her true love came in every form, in dust and wind and roses. Her voice grew high and shrill and wilder. And in the end, she brewed an evil brew of mice and woad and cockatrice and rue. And over this she cast a spell in metaphor. The steel I wear is strength. The flaw therein is pride. Thunder how I will, I'm never safe inside.
The old man blinked away a tear.
Men see her in every Maytime, swinging like a smoky lantern in a tree. Ride swiftly, Prince, and love ride with you.
The young prince watched the aged knight in silence and heard him out.
She named you valiant,
Was all that Jorn could say.
and placed the crevice in your armor not too near the heart.
There was a deep moaning from the armor.
As the figure of Duff of the dolorous doom clanked slowly away and was lost among the trees.
Prince Jorn hurriedly refilled the chalice with the scattered rubies.
And a moment later, he was riding swiftly for the castle of his father.
Silver chalice shining in his hand.
Part 6, The Dark Enchantment.
4 knuckles rapped 7 times on the door of the high room in the castle.
And when the princess bade her visitor to enter, King Claude strode in.
And after him came Taco.
And the royal recorder.
and the royal physician.
We have three bitter things to say: a fact, a tale, and a conclusion.
began Claude, and his heavy face turned red,
If I may speak first, sire,
said the princess.
I have a bitter doubt to say.
Then speak your doubt,
Said Claude.
unless it touch the honor of my sons or me.
Tut, 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 tut.
Said Taco, who was peering closely at the princess.
Tut me no tuts.
Said Claude.
I'm in no mood this day for tutting.
He waved his hand, and the princess went on.
The doubt has come to me that since I cannot remember my name, perhaps I have no name to speak of. Perhaps I am a milkmaid or a kitchen wench. Tut, tut.
Said Taco.
My mother was a country maid and often used to sing, when all the princesses are gone, the country maids will still go on. I have no contempt for any woman,
Said the princess.
as long as she confesses who and what she is, and there are rules, decrees, and orders by which no maid of low estate or common blood may marry Jorn,
Or fag,
said Claude.
Or Gallo.
said the royal recorder.
My father used to sing a rhyme that went in part,
Said Taco.
kings and princes, dolts and dunces.
You'll end your rhyme in the dungeon if you do not hold your peace.
Cried King Claude. He walked over to the princess, who was once more scanning the three roads with anxious eyes.
I could swear, and almost do, in spite of facts I'm privy to, that you're a princess of the blood.
He turned and addressed the others.
Mark the manner of her speech and the carriage of her head.
And the slimness of her ankle and the smallness of her foot.
Said the royal recorder.
And the bright highness of her forehead and the brightness of her eye.
Said Taco.
You are deceived by illusion,
Cried the royal physician, who had been quietly taking his own pulse, but not counting it.
For as a patient, he still considered himself sick, while as a physician, he contended that he was well.
It's this confounded sorcery. I tell you, nothing confuses the practice of medicine one half as much as sorcery. I recall a patient I had, a wizard, who could cause a tumor to dance all over his body and assume even the appearance of a flower or a jewel. Let us not be taken in by false shapes and semblances. What is, was, and what was, will be. I'll test the creature's heart.
The lady's heart.
Claude.
We'll go by seeming till we have the proof. I promised her a fact, a tale, and a conclusion.
Said Claude.
I'll tell the tale.
Said Taco.
I'll draw the conclusion.
Said the royal physician.
I'll state the fact.
Said the royal recorder.
It is a fact, then,
He said to the princess.
that you cannot remember your name.
Taco will tell the tale.
Said Claude.
In point of fact,
said the royal recorder.
And truth and count and number, there are more tales than one to tell. There's Taco's tale and 9 besides, all identical, exact, and parallel.
We'll stick to one,
Said Claude.
since they're all the same.
I merely wish to state, avow, affirm, asseverate, maintain, confess, proclaim, protest, announce, vouchsafe, and say that there are precisely 10 such tales in all. Each and every one duplicates, substantiates, corroborates, and proves each and every other.
Don't wrap me up in words.
Cried Claude.
Taco, tell the tale.
And Taco told the tale of the white deer of 100 years ago,
And how it was, in truth, a deer and not a princess of the blood.
The princess listened in silence, standing very still.
The royal physician will draw the conclusion.
Ordered King Claude.
The royal physician who had been saying
Ah,
to himself in a corner,
And tapping his chest,
and counting to 9,
stepped forward.
the conclusion to be drawn.
he said, touching the tips of his fingers together.
The conclusion to be drawn is that you are in fact and in truth, beyond the shadow, question, or peradventure of a doubt. But stay, I did not test your heart.
He placed his right ear against the breast of the princess and listened.
Muttering,
Hum,
And
oh,
and
hum,
again,
The heart is much too high, much too high,
he announced at last.
both as to location and rapidity of beat. There is a skip, a definite skip, such as might be brought on by too much leaping over brooks. Much too much leaping over brooks. But I could not give a final opinion, of course, until I had examined the brooks.
The king scowled and looked away.
draw the conclusion.
Ordered,
Ah, yes, the conclusion.
said the royal physician.
The conclusion is that in all human probability, or should I say, all animal probability, but certainly not to all intents and purposes, you are, dear lady, dear creature, I should say, dear.
The
Say, ah,
royal physician added to himself, and he retired to a corner, saying,
ah.
King Claude stared at the cold stone floor, his face still flushed.
The royal recorder fumbled foolishly with a pocket full of seals and ribbons.
Taco's dim old eyes, no longer strong enough to see the moon or the stars, were soft with pity.
The princess did not move except to lift her head a little higher.
If you still cannot remember your name, then you must be a dear,
Said the king.
A princess would remember her name.
said the royal recorder.
Particularly in view of the fact that there is no evidence of a concussion severe enough to eradicate memory, and no marked dilation or contraction of the pupils of the eye to indicate the presence of a potion, filter, or other obliterant.
said the royal physician.
Obliterant.
He repeated, frowning.
You are perhaps thinking of eradicant.
Said the royal recorder.
Eradicant is a word, I believe, although when you repeat it, it does sound meaningless.
Be done with this weighing of words, this measuring of meaning.
Cried Claude.
Explain the nature of the spell, the rule of her enchantment.
The royal recorder cleared his throat.
And he spoke.
And spoke. In enchantments of this kind, which I hold to be an extremely bad taste, the true deer, having assumed the face and form of a princess, finds it impossible, for obvious reasons, to retain the love of knight or prince or peasant, since once her unhappy secret is revealed.
Get on with it. Get on with it.
Ordered the king.
Love most certainly shall fail you thrice. Thus runs the line and measure of your spell.
Intoned the recorder solemnly.
When love has failed you thrice, you will resume the shape and semblance of a deer.
And mind you, no more leaping over brooks, bad for the heart.
The royal physician said.
Me, me.
He added, testing his throat for soreness.
Alas and woe, unhappy doe.
The royal recorder cried.
Hold your tongue, you saucy clerk.
Said Claude.
This lady is a princess to the present sight, and shall be so addressed while still she stands on 2 legs, not on 4.
The princess spoke at last, her dark eyes clear and fearless.
I ask the right to tell my prince, before he claims my heart and hand, this sorry tale.
She said.
Asked and granted, done and done,
Claude bowed.
and spoken like a princess.
The royal recorder cleared his throat again.
If it should chance, happen, occur, take place, or come to pass that this prince or that or the other should still maintain his love for you in spite of what has been and truly is and should be, why, then you will forever keep the shape and semblance of a princess. So reads the ancient spell, so runs the old enchantment.
Taco stepped forward and raised his hand.
I beg you to remember, Claude, the mother of your sons once bore the shape and semblance of a deer, and yet she was in truth a princess of the royal blood.
But damn it all, she knew her name.
Cried Claude.
This pretty dear.
This princess by your own decree,
The royal recorder said.
This princess, then.
Claude began again, and flushed and turned away.
I am what I will be, said the princess. I will be what am.
There's this to lift your heart.
Said Claude.
You were the swiftest deer that ever tried the strength and skill of men. No common oaf shall give you chase, as in the case of Taco's father's deer. You're fit for kings and princes as you stand or as you run.
The room had clouded with darkness.
And the moment of silence that followed, and in the moment of silence that followed, the king's high praise. There was a distant sound of many hoofbeats.
The king strode to the window and looked out.
What magic's this?
He shouted.
Behold, 3 trophies shine together. 3 princes ride as one. Their paths have crossed and joined where inch and second meet. There is miracle in this and sorcery.
Taco
The royal recorder
and the royal physician
Peered over King Claude's enormous shoulders and beheld
Thag
and Gallo and Jorn,
galloping for the castle gates.
their trophies shining in their hands.
their horses racing nose to nose as if in single harness.
A princess
Who stood with her back to the fading light in the window, her eyes closed,
felt a hand take hers.
And heard the deep voice of Quando the dwarf say,
"Come."
He led her from the room and down the winding stone stair and into the great circular chamber.
He handed her into the high carved golden chair and squatted on the floor beside her at her right.
The circular room rang with the sound of running feet as the breathless king and his breathless retainers rushed in through one door.
And the panting princes rushed in through another.
Before the princess in the golden chair could make the sorry tale of her enchantment heard,
Above the stamping and the shouts,
The princess placed, all at the same moment, their trophies at her feet.
Thag, the golden tusks of the great blue boar,
Gallo, the sacred sword of Lorelau,
and Jorn, the silver chalice filled with rubies.
the whiles they cried in perfect unison,
I claim
Claim
your heart
and
and
hand.
hand. A heavy breathing silence fell at last, and no man moved.
The princes knelt,
each one on one knee.
their eyes upon the princess.
The king and his retainers stood like frozen men.
Quando squatted motionless.
The princess rose,
Straight and fine and fearless,
And spoke in her low and lovely voice, addressing the king.
I know not in what order to proceed. 3 princes kneel as one. 3 trophies shine together.
The king scowled and turned to the royal recorder.
Announce the order.
He commanded.
This wonder is unknown, at least in my time.
Said the royal recorder.
And in my time and in my father's.
Said old Taco.
But I should say, if you will so decree,
said the royal recorder to the king.
Decreed.
Cried Claude.
Decreed and done.
then let the eldest son speak first, and so on, in that order.
I cannot see a thing.
And Taco,
Light the torches.
cried the king, and through the castle halls the order echoed.
Light the torches.
Light the torches!
Light the torches.
12 small men in yellow flashed about the chamber.
and in a moment, flames flared from the circular wall.
The princess spoke, her sorrowful eyes on Thag.
You claim the heart and hand of one who is in truth a deer, changed by whim of witch or wizard to the shape and semblance of a woman.
While the torches flared and flickered between the shields and lances on the wall, the princess spoke again.
By old remembered spells and ancient tales, by every mark and sign, 3 princes claim the heart and hand of one who is in truth a deer. I know the perils you have known, the leagues forlorn, the weather born to lay your trophies at my nameless feet. Love me truly, fail me never. Woman will I be forever. But if love shall fail me thrice, I shall vanish in a trice. So tells the tale, so runs the spell. Prince Thag, do you love me well?
The eldest son of Claude froze to his feet without a word. He broke the golden tusks of the great blue boar in his hands.
And turned his back.
Love has failed her once.
Moaned Taco.
Love me truly, fail me never. Woman will I be forever. But if love shall fail me thrice, I shall vanish in a trice. So tells the tale, so runs the spell. Prince Gallo, do you love me well?
Prince Gallo rose to his feet.
Without a word, he broke the sacred sword of Lord Lao across his knee and walked away.
And turned his back.
Love has failed her twice,
Whispered the royal recorder.
Love me truly, fail me never. Woman will I be forever. But if love shall fail me thrice, I shall vanish in a trace. So tells the tale, so runs the spell. Prince Jorn, do you love me well? Love will fail her thrice.
spoke the royal physician.
Prince Jorn rose to his feet and lifted the silver chalice filled with rubies.
Throw wide the portals.
Cried King Claude.
Let the white deer pass. Who reaches for his lance dies like a hog. Throw wide the portals. Let the white deer pass.
And through the castle halls, the order echoed.
Throw wide the portals.
Throw wide the portals.
Throw wide the portals.
The white figure that stood before the golden chair was still.
All eyes were strained, all necks were craned as Prince Jorn raised the chalice,
One could hear a petal fall.
whispered the royal recorder.
I cannot hear a thing.
Taco,
Silence,
roared the king.
and give her room. Denials in Jorn's heart, all hear her doom.
Prince Jorn spoke.
What you have been, you are not, and what you are, you will forever be. I place this trophy in the hands of love.
Prince took the chalice. The princess took the chalice in her hand.
You hold my heart.
Said Jorn.
As the young prince spoke, the torches died to the tranquility of candlelight.
And April fragrance filled the room.
And Jorn beheld a new and lovelier princess than he had ever seen in life or dreams.
The fragrance, if my memory serves,
Old Taco said.
of lilacs. Shh.
said the royal physician.
Who is this prince? This tall, strange prince who takes the chalice from the lady's hand?
Whispered the royal recorder.
For out of nowhere, in a tick of time, a stranger had indeed appeared.
A stranger tall and dark and young.
Who stood beside the lovely maid and held her chalice in his hands.
That she might descend the few steps from the golden chair and place her hand in Jorn's.
King Claude, who had seen the strange prince at the same moment as the others, closed his eyes.
And rubbed them with his knuckles.
And opened them again.
He took a step forward.
Your name, your kingdom, and your cause.
Bellowed Claude.
The tall prince bowed to the king and spoke.
Before I name my name, my kingdom, and my cause, I seek a royal favor.
Name its nature.
Said the king.
A deed undone that's wanted doing.
The prince set down the silver chalice on the golden chair.
The royal recorder cleared his throat.
The flavor should be named, described, and specified.
The royal recorder said.
It should be duly entered on a scroll and signed and sealed.
Nonsense,
said the king.
I like the young man's eye. The favor is granted.
At this, the unknown prince strode to where Thag and Gallo stood.
He caught them up, one in each arm, and knocked their heads together
7 times.
and set them down.
The king's loud laughter shook the iron shields on the wall.
Oh, what god is this who plays with men like puppets?
Bellowed Claude.
The young prince bowed.
My name is Tell, your majesty, and I'm the youngest son of Thorg, the mighty king of Northland.
A rich and mighty monarch, and by all report, a good man in the saddle.
Said the king. He waved the young man on.
You have my kingdom and my name, and now my cause. Your majesty, may I present to you your sons and your retainers, my youngest sister, noble daughter of a noble king, affianced bride of brave Prince Jorn.
Prince Tell bowed deeply to the dark and lovely lady, whose hand still clung to Jorn's.
Her Royal Highness, the Princess Rosenor of Northland.
Claude and his men were held as by a new enchantment.
And for a long, astonished moment,
No one stirred and no one spoke.
The face of Claude went all the colors of a flag.
Before it found at last its normal flush of wine and weather.
Lyres and fiddles,
bellowed Claude.
meats and wines. What wine, on second thought, is fit for this occasion? Melt down 1,000,000 rubies, but say, on third thought, wine in bottles. The magics turned my heart, but not my stomach. Prince Tell and Princess Rosenor, I bid you warmth and welcome, health and joy.
This case lacks precedent.
A royal recorder wailed.
And lacking precedent is difficult, if not indeed impossible, to classify, coordinate, and catalog. We have here terms of 2 distinct and unrelated sets of spells which overlap, overlapping in the legal sense I heartily deplore.
He babbled on, but no one listened,
There was a great running
and scurrying,
Laughter,
and a movement.
and a fine exchange of courtesy and compliment.
while lyres and fiddles played.
The royal wizard produced a shower of silver stars.
And a great table in the banquet hall was filled with meats and flowers and wine.
Prince Tell sat at the head of the table beside the king.
And on their right sat Rosenor.
And on their left sat Jorn.
The king smote the table with a heavy blow.
Which set the crystal dancing.
I knew her
Said the king.
by the manner of her speech and the carriage of her head,
I knew her
said the royal recorder.
by the smallness of her foot and the slimness of her ankle.
I knew her, said Taco, by the highness of her forehead and the brightness of her eye. I knew her by the singing in my heart.
Said Jorn.
Thag and Gallo glowered at their plates,
You are a dolt,
said Thag,
You are a dunce.
said Gallo.
Claude stared about him into the dark places under the shields.
There is a stupid dwarf
He said to Tell.
who creeps about the night like cats,
like cats or like a cat.
like cats.
Said Claude.
He seems to sit in 6 or 7 corners all at once.
You've had him long?
Asked Tell.
3 months or so.
And Claude, said Claude, he drank off a tankard of wine.
Popped up one day, and I let him stay. A good hand with the horses and the hounds. And what is more, a better judge of men than I. In proof of which, I owe the misbegotten clown a cask of gems. I've never lost a wager with a lighter heart. I have a silly fondness for the dwarf. Can't say I ever showed it, though. I hope no harm's befallen him.
Claude raised another tankard to his lips and drank and closed his eyes.
Wando's gone forever, sire,
said Tell in an old familiar rumble that the king remembered well.
The tankard clattered to the floor.
Claude leaped to his feet.
And closed both eyes.
And opened one.
And stared at Tell.
You're Quando,
cried the king.
I was.
Said Tell.
The king drank off another bowl of wine before he spoke again.
I like the taste of wine.
He said.
The feel of leather. I'll ride or drink your father down in any weather. I am a hunter, sir, a fair man in the saddle. Ah, yes.
His eyes shone.
In any weather. I have no mind for miracle, my friend. And were I the king of all the kings, I'd make an end of magic. I have few graces, Tell, no doubt for lack of daughters. And if I have offended you, I humbly beg your pardon. Wizardry's a wofuler thing than wine, and it's befuddled stronger heads than mine.
He drank deep from the bowl once more.
Adiers, now Rosenor. A dwarf is Tell. What rhyme or signal broke the spell? Who could this dark enchantment bring upon the children of a king?
He smote the table a great blow and called for silence.
Magic bitter, magic sweet.
Claude began.
He groped for a rhyme and could not find it.
Has united the great house of Claude with the great house of Thorg.
He drank from the huge bowl of wine.
A man I can outride and outdrink the best day he ever saw, though that's beside the present point. We have beheld a miracle this day which wants explaining. I give you young Prince Fell.
Sat down and rose again with some effort.
Tell.
He said with great dignity.
And resumed his chair.
All eyes were on the tall young prince, except the eyes of Thag and Gallo.
Who were muttering to each other.
The wine has mulled your wits,
Said Thag.
I tell you, the dragon has to be wound up
Said Gallo.
with a great big key.
Silence!
roared the king, and young Prince Tell rose to his feet.
And began the tale of his sister's enchantment and his own.
My father's sire, the great King Thorg of Northland, was loved by many damsels in his youth.
The prince began.
His feats in battle and the chase broke open the tender locks of 500 hearts.
Said Claude.
Get on with it.
One damsel was a dark and jealous wench named Nagrum Yaff, who on the day my father wed the princess of his choice, swore a frightful vengeance on his house. 1 year and 20 days ago, the Princess Rosenor and I were riding in the wilderness of Gwain. The sun went down, the wind rose. We were lost. A crooked moon came up, and by its light, we saw a creature lying in the grass, a creature like a vulture, dead or dreaming. Before I could dismount, it seemed to rise and float before our eyes, making horrid signs and symbols. In the air, a witch in the unspeakable employ of Nagrum Yaff. She cast her awful spells, the whiles we sat like stones on stony horses. Rosenor was changed into a deer which could be disenchanted only if and when a king and his 3 sons should bring the deer to bay. But even then, she would not know and could not speak her name. But on such day and in such hour, as she should hear a prince declare his love for her, in spite of doubt and dread and tattletale, the spell would break like crystal struck on stone, and she'd be Princess Rosenor again.
King Claude was chewing his mustaches.
And what if young Prince Jorn here had not declared his love?
He asked.
If love had failed my sister thrice,
Said Tell.
she would have wandered aimless all her life. These spells,
The royal recorder said.
are shockingly untidy. These spells should all be written down and witnessed and attested. Of all assumptions in our law, the strongest one is this: scribendum est, which is to say that if the scroll does not exist, the scroll does not exist. And if the scroll does not exist, the spell is null and void, violable, unviable, and fallible, and tolerable only to the gullible. These present spells, i.e. spells A and B involving Rosenor and Tell, hereinafter to be referred as 1 and 2, should either be recast or just ignored as never having been in legal fact, which holds that if a thing that should not be has been, it never was. It's vastly more elastic than the ordinary, that then the master elastic and rewarding than the mundane or ordinary fact, which holds that just because a thing has been, it was.
Scribble, scrabble, scrubble.
said Claude.
My own enchantment
Tell resumed.
was something else than other. I was changed into a dwarf, possessed of all remembrance. I knew my name and Rosenor's, but lacked the power to name our name or tell our tale in language plain or roundabout to her or any other. But on such day and in such hour as I should hear a prince declare his love for Rosenor, in spite of doubt and dread and tattletale, then I would be Prince Tell again. If love had failed the princess thrice, I would have been the squat dwarf Quando all my life.
How came you here?
Demanded Claude.
How came your sister to our woeful woods?
She fled through 20 kingdoms in the year of our despair,
said Tell.
and always Quando followed, 100 leagues behind. Minstrels, knights, and travelers would point the way the swiftest deer in all the world had gone. And I would wander on. I lost her in the snowy months and wandered here, for they had told me tales of your enchanted woods. Enchanted woods attract enchanted things. My heart was high with hope. You were a king, sire, and your sons were 3, as stipulated in the sorcery. I fed your hounds and horses for my keep, and visited the magic woods each night, dropping softly from my chamber window to the ground. At last she came. I saw her flash like moonlight through the fireflies and the snow. I'd met a wizard in the woods, the mighty wizard Ro. I could not name my name or to him or Rosenor's or tell our tale. But wizards have a way of knowing things. In guise of minstrel, here one night he sang you songs about a deer as swift as light.
I thought I knew the saucy varlet's face,
roared Claude.
and said so at the time.
The tall prince smiled and went on with the tale.
By this device and that device, the wizard played with time. I fancied Thag and Gallo were delayed. I fancied Jorn was speeding on his way. The wizard's magic brought the princess riding home, not singly, but together. He must have been the round man in the tree,
Said Thag.
He must have been the man in blue.
Said Gallo.
He must have been the little man who told me why the cherries fall.
said Jorn.
I knew they rode by sorcery and said so at the time.
Cried Claude.
I don't remember that you did.
The royal recorder said.
Nor I,
Said Taco,
nor I.
The royal physician.
who was striking his knee sharply under the table to test his reflexes.
I do.
Rosenor.
There's magic here and sorcery, he cried. I heard it clearly.
As wise as she is lovely,
Shouted Claude.
surrounded by these dodderers and dolts, I blow my horn in wasteland, so to speak.
He picked up a fresh bowl of wine that had been set before him.
So ends the tale of Rosenor's enchantment and my own.
Said Tell.
The rest, you know.
He bowed to the king and sat down.
I blow my horn in wasteland.
Repeated Claude.
And since he seemed about to weep, the lyres and fiddles struck up a lively tune
King Claude got to his feet.
and raised a tankard of wine.
Here's to joy and jollity.
He said to Rosenor and Tell,
And to Rosenor and Jorn.
And here's to Thorg, a mighty king, the second huntsman of his time. All drink.
the lyres and fiddles played brightly,
And the royal wizard produced a flight of white deers.
and a
Doves.
shower of blood roses.
The royal physician.
Who always sneezed when there were doves and roses.
Got up and backed out of the room, bowing and sneezing.
In the darkness of the corridor outside the banquet hall,
He stumbled over a large and dreamy flop-eared dog.
And fell flat on his back.
he limped up to his chambers, sneezing and protesting.
The wizard produced a silver fountain and a golden rain over the lyres and fiddles.
Old Taco rose to his feet and recited a legend for a sundial.
Which had come to him as he watched Jorn dance with Rosenor.
Rosenor danced with Tell.
As slow as time, as long as love, the rose, the fountain, and the dove.
The royal recorder
Who had drunk more wine than was his custom,
recited laws of mortmain and chancery to himself.
King Claude rambled on above the music and the laughter.
sing hey and ho and drink and dance, but not too long or late. Tomorrow, when the sun is high, we ride to Northland.
He winced as he pronounced the name.
And closed both eyes and opened one.
I still maintain I'd rather die than drink that northern wine. It's bleak as turtle tears and harsh as witches' spells. I swear the stuff is only good for rubbing rust from buckles and from bells.
He raised a bowl of white clodernium high above his head.
God bless us all.
He cried and drank it off.
And went to bed through the laughter and the music,
The silver fountain and the golden rain.
the roses and the doves.
The next day, when the sun would have marked the hour of noon on Taco's sundials,
If it could have got at them,
The king and his sons
and Rosenor and Tell,
started off for Northland.
in full panoply and jingling trappings,
100
100 mules brought up the rear,
carrying 200 casks of red
and white
and yellow wines.
Part 7.
There is
Epilogue.
There is a dusty yellow scroll
Written in the olden time,
which tells that on the day and in the hour when Prince Jorn said to Rosenor,
"You hold my heart,"
the dark and jealous Nagram Yaff and the wicked witch in her employ
were riven and shriveled by a bolt of lightning from the blue.
and removed completely from the world.
as by a strong and strange obliterant.
I find no cause to doubt the scroll.
For it is signed and sealed
And witnessed.
And attested